One. Hey, Michael, how you doing,
Hey
man?
man,
Uh,
doing good. I heard you tried the Vision Pro.
did and you returned yours. So
I
lots of
did on Friday or Saturday, like a week ago.
got it. Okay, cool. Last week you joined the call on it, and now it's back on the shelf at Apple. Yeah, I tried it, so I'd love to talk about that first. I think we'll talk Vision Pro, and then yeah, there's so much happened. Just it's amazing. We're now looking to do these every week, and just in the last 8 or 9 days since we last talked, you had Sora from OpenAI, Google's Gemini, all sorts going on with that. So I guess we'll just talk about the bull and bear case on a lot of these generative AI platforms. And then I'm really excited to break down this Douglas Rushkoff, Duncan Trussell podcast and sort of the pros and cons of some of this tech utopia stuff. So anyways, a lot to get into.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I wanted quick meta points. So it is end of February, entering March, and I feel like we were in the same mood last year. GPT-4 came out mid-March, and there was a lot coming out. It was crazy last February, and maybe this is obvious, but there's definitely there's grooves to the year, right? There's a reason that all the big stock market crashes happened in October,
Mm,
and I think there's a reason why in February tech companies come out with their updates, right?
mm,
January is the start of the year. It's kind of the lull. People are getting back. February, it's like it's the second month of the year, right? But it's the first, like, all right, we're used to it now. We're in 2024. Here's what's new. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that February was this rush.
yeah, really interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, it's like kind of the natural cycle of things. Totally. A year ago was the most I've ever felt the AI hype because it was you had 3.5 the previous December, and then March was GPT-4. Yeah, this week felt to me the closest it's felt to that time about a year ago because there's just multiple things in one day. So yeah, I guess maybe every year we can look forward to this,
Yeah.
or the cycles will compress and it'll be multiple times per year. But yeah, man. So we'll jump there first. I do want to talk Vision Pro a little bit. So yeah, I went over to the Apple Store last week, especially after our talk. I just felt like I really had to give it a try, and yeah, I'm just trying to think like the I put it on, and I'm impressed right away with where you track your eyes, and if you can track your eyes and things like that. But there's a moment I'm assuming you did the Apple Store demo as well.
Yes.
There's a moment in the Apple Store demo where there's a mom and her kids, and there's a little girl blowing out her birthday cake, and,
Yep.
and like the immersive video view. And that was the first moment in that demo where I just audibly gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, this is something categorically different than I've ever seen with technology before." It really floored me. It really floored me. Um, from that, I'm just trying to remember the different components of the demo that really struck me. One was when you're placed in the 360 view at like the lake with the campground, and that's pretty dramatic. So I'm turning all
Yeah.
around.
That's Mount Hood.
Okay, there you go, Mount Hood in Oregon. So I really noticed that one. But yeah, the other one, I think the other one that really hit me. Um, Here we go. I got the full list here: the birthday cake, the campground, the lake. Yeah, so it goes into cinematic mode, and I think you had like a Mario movie, and that was pretty impressive. It feels like you're in a movie theater. The other, I'd say on par, the only other moment truly on par with that birthday cake is then it switches to, I forget which mode it is, but it's a 180-degree view, but you feel like you're totally immersed in it. And they had Alicia Keys singing in the studio.
Yes.
And that was another just like, heart leaps out of your chest, like, oh my gosh, sort of moment. Because it's just hard to, it just feels like you're there in the studio with her. It sounds trite, and it's, yeah, I get it. And then you actually try it yourself. It's like if a friend is trying to describe what, I don't know, a drug feels like or something, and then you try it yourself. Like, oh, so that's what
Yep.
you can understand it. I've been watching a lot of Vervaeke lately. So what he would say, to make it really precise, I could understand it propositionally, but I then had a participatory experience of it, like a firsthand
Like
felt
that.
experience of being in it. And then they just go on a real highlight tour, right? They do Alicia Keys, the fjord, the woman climbing the fjord. She's like a mountain climber in Norway. The kids playing soccer in Africa. That was maybe the one where I most felt like I was there. Whatever, say we're in Uganda, some field where these kids are kicking around a soccer ball. And with the spatial audio combined with the really vibrant, immersive visual, I felt like I'd been flown to Africa. It was just remarkable. Then you're underwater with a shark. That one's just sort of feels like you're thrust into an IMAX movie. Like you couldn't really actually be there unless you're scuba diving, but that one was pretty cool. There's a grizzly bear going through the water, and just hearing the sounds of it splashing through the water felt very realistic. And then the other two that really took my breath away were the sports ones, because I watched a lot of sports, obviously. And they cut to a view behind a goal, like a World Cup game, and a soccer ball being kicked, and the goalie's diving for it. And it's like you're there in the front row. And then it's a baseball shot along the first baseline, and guys throwing a guy out at first base. Those two, to me, the other ones were like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm almost teleporting to Africa or to this fjord in Norway. But the sports ones, I think my mind jumped to the commercial application of like, I've watched sports my whole life. Like the way we watch sports in the future will be fundamentally different. If you are in fact watching through some type of VR device, I could just imagine having a dozen different camera angles, and you're just immersed either in the aerial cam or the sideline cam or the pylon cam or even the referee's hat cam. Like you can just be in the game. It's like it's what it feels like to me. That to me feels like the move from theater to cinema, right? And it took a couple decades because there's a skeuomorphic thing, but eventually, what's his name? Was it Kubrick who does Citizen Kane? Figures out is that right? Stanley Kubrick? I think that's right. Anyways, he realizes you have three dimensions to play with. You can go through the window or have this like big tracking shot where it's not just like you're watching a set of a play in movie form. Like the new technology affords a whole new type of experience. And that's what I got from the sports one. It's like, oh, I can be in the game in a way that, despite all the camera angles today, it's still quite flat. Anyway, so that's just like a laundry list. But Birthday Cake, Alicia Keys, maybe the sports one as well, were the especially dramatic moments. I mean, I texted friends after. It's like, if you guys haven't tried this thing, it's staggering. Like you need to try it. I'd never
going. Yeah, it's like people don't. They underestimate what the experience is like. Like anyone can do it, and I feel like everybody should.
I think so.
I think most of what you described is basically spatial video, right? Which is you're basically in a fixed point of view, but it's almost like 3D really kind of finally makes sense, right? Like watching 3D in a movie theaters never was quite worth it, but this actually has a sense of being present in a space.
Yeah.
Panzifis, he gave me the best metaphor for it, and he said that people felt like they're in the afterlife reviewing their own memories. Like when you're in that birthday cake scene, it's like, damn, like I actually have the sense that I'm not looking at the memory through a flat pane or a keg. It's beyond a camera. It's like you're actually returning to a moment from the past, which is a very trippy experience.
100%. Yeah, that was the single moment that most stands out, that I think I'll always remember. Like it felt like the Black Mirror, like the episode with the contact lens, like kind of like that. Like,
yeah.
Not like through the looking glass, like we're in a new paradigm. I most strongly felt it with Birthday Cake because it's also such a mundane scene. Like, yes, there's the one of the woman rock climbing, and it's like you're there, but that's just like a IMAX movie on steroids. The Birthday Cake one is you just picture the tens of thousands of photos and all the videos I have on my camera roll. And as far as I know, that the shot of the Birthday Cake wasn't from something that was filmed natively for VR. I think it was just a regular video that was just given those three dimensions. Maybe you don't know. I don't know.
You can actually shoot through an iPhone 15 Pro. Through a normal phone now, you can actually capture the spatial photos and videos.
So if we were to take a past, so maybe there's just like, if we were to take a past, if I filmed a video 5 years ago and I viewed it through my Vision Pro, it would be immersive, but it wouldn't necessarily have the rich three dimensions. Is that the right distinction? Okay. But still, even before, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say with the Ray-Bans that I wear, which take first person video, it's cool because those are actually aligned with your eyes. And in the Vision Pro, I was blowing them up to be bigger than full scale. And it was amazing watching that, but it didn't have that additional depth where it's almost like if you lean a little bit left and right, there's a sense of, what's the word called? I forget if it's like parallax, but like kind of like based on your head position, it can, Yeah. And I think that comes from, like on these glasses, you have two cameras here and there. Technically, this could take spatial video and pictures, but whenever I take footage, it's only coming out of the left one. For whatever reason, it could be battery issues, but you get that effect from having two cameras in something.
Right, right, and then yeah, you just need different points of reference to create the multiple dimensions. So that
Right.
makes sense. But I mean, still, just the immersive, the first few that they show you in the demo, I don't remember even what the contents are, but they're still quite impressive. Like you are still immersed in a 2D image. It's filling up your whole screen, your whole visual field. But yeah, the 3D stuff is just astonishing. Yeah, it seems like if the iPhone 15 can capture those types of image, at least going forward, any videos or images we capture, you'll be able to return to sort of in that 3D setting. So I mean, yeah, I was really impressed with the things that didn't impress me. I mean, just the weight on my face. I don't know if the band was too tight or something, but I sat there thinking like, man, it's starting to, it's not so painful, but it's uncomfortable after, a 20-minute demo. I can't really imagine watching a 2 or 3 hour movie or longer. I mean, maybe I know that's something Zuckerberg talked about. There's probably ways to adjust it or use the different band, but there's that. That's honestly probably my biggest criticism. Uh, the stuff we talked about in our last recording about how you can just sort of fall into this sensorium, I think is what Ho calls it, but it's just like this infinite, abundant entertainment palooza, if you will. It just that piece of it, I think, is concerning because it is so good. And if you're in these incredible immersive 3D videos, I can see how it becomes quite addicting. But yeah, I only tried it. So you have more thoughts because you purchased it for a while and really tried it out. But I was just, to summarize, I was profoundly impressed. And I don't know exactly how it'll play into my life in the short term because I'm not going to buy one right now, but I just can't imagine how beyond 3 to 5 years from now, some version of this isn't a pretty big part of how at least a substantial piece of how I spend my entertainment time. That's my assumption. I don't know if you share that assumption because you returned it. Like, how do you think about the next 5 years and how prevalent headsets will be in your entertainment consumption or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, you actually met, sorry, in the beginning of 2023, I got the Ray-Bans Meta, the first edition. I wore those all year. I have the second pair now, and I still wear them like 50% of every day, maybe. And I'm taking photo and video from them. I'm taking generally like I'm capturing stuff more often because it's so convenient.
Mm.
And like my wife even said, the coolest thing about the Vision Pro is the spatial video. But the thing is, if you want to actually use that, you kind of need to be wearing this thing all the time so you're ready to capture it, and it's just too heavy. And the reality is, you don't need that whole form factor to take spatial videos. You can do it with an iPhone, and I wouldn't be surprised if in V3 or even through an update, the glasses
Mm.
could take spatial video. Um, and they also modified the Quest 3. So the Quest 3 can now view spatial video too.
Mm. Wow.
Um, and the resolution of the screen won't match the Vision Pro, but you could imagine in 2 to 3 years with I could imagine people having two devices, the glasses to capture throughout their life, and then the sleek kind of thin-ish
Mm.
headset to actually review your memories. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can see that. And I mean, I consider even buying the Quest 3. Um, I think like as soon as I returned the Vision Pro, I called up a friend and I said, "Hey, you want to jump in our Quest 1 and 2 and we'll just play ping pong?"
Mm.
And we played for like 45 minutes, and that one experience had something different that wasn't part of the Vision Pro at all. Like I was with someone else and I'm playing ping pong in a pretty convincing way.
Yeah.
Um, so it's hard to say. I mean, I think your question was, will people be using it for entertainment?
I guess to modify slightly in your own life, 5 years from today. So February 2029, how much do you think headsets will be a part of your day-to-day life, if at all?
I could picture myself owning the headset and using it 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week.
Hmm.
You know, what about
Or
you?
primarily entertainment?
I could see it for reviewing photos, right? Like kind of going through things. Okay, and actually, let me change that. There could be a chance that everyone's using it all the time. Like, okay, so you used to use the word teleport, and like that's a natural word to use in virtual reality. Like you're bringing to another brought to another place. Um, and we've talked about this a lot. I think there's a version where the Vision Pro, if it's sleeker, if it's done right, it can capture my whole room in real time. And
Mm.
you can actually be in my room walking around that I would see you in AR and you'd be in VR. And I would imagine when we cross that threshold, um, it lets me like jump through the screen to be in your place. And it fundamentally changes work and remote work because remote work doesn't work right now because you're kind of, we're all trapped behind screens and you can't really be co-working. It's not the same thing as being in the office, but what if these headsets enable people to have that shared experience of we're actually all in the same space, even though we're not there?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The line in the sand that is coming up for me based on your answer and all is like, when does it see something of the fidelity of the Vision Pro, super, super high resolution. It does. I mean, when I was watching these kids play soccer in Africa, I felt like I was in Africa. I mean, it was just the spatial audio, the spatial video it was incredible. And so, but if in 5 years it's strictly for entertainment, I could still, I don't know where I'll be in my life in terms of, you know, family, kids, and all that, married with kids. But right now, how much YouTube do I watch per day? Maybe like 30 minutes to an hour. It's probably, it used to be more, and I've limited on my phone, but I'm at least on YouTube for 30 minutes a day because it's this incredible infinite portal. Sometimes I think I don't know if this is a weird reference, but you know that movie Monsters Inc. you saw when you were a kid, and they had the
yeah.
infinite doors. I sometimes envision YouTube as that. It's just like this infinity of like doors you can jump into these other realities. But it's still so limited. It's just on my phone or my tablet or whatever. And so if in 5 years it's just that, it's just way better, more sophisticated doors you can jump through. I still think I would spend, my entertainment allotment for the day, 30 minutes to an hour in that. Like, I don't watch much regular TV unless it's live sports. YouTube is just more interesting to the unique, weird things that I'm interested in. And so I could see the Vision Pro replacing that time, but it would just be way better. Like, I just found a YouTube video, and it's a AI rendering of New York's evolution from the year 1542 to 2024. And it's pretty remarkable. Like, it just takes you through what it would be like to be in New York. And I've always found that really interesting. Well, what if you could be immersed in Manhattan Island in, the year 1542 or whatever? That's fascinating. I'd probably spend my 30 minutes to an hour doing that, watching Civil War battle reenactments, traveling to Neptune, like in it's really compelling entertainment. And I would probably spend hopefully no more than say 30 minutes to an hour a day doing that. The key question, I think you're right, is when does it leap from just this super enhanced entertainment device to, I guess you want to call it a productivity device, or like a way you can almost effectively not just teleport in a passive watching mode, but like a read write, like an actually active, you're there interacting with a human mode. And that, I think, is when they'll revolutionize work, I don't know, conversations like this one, other types of entertainment that we can't really even foresee. And it's that, I think, is coming. I just don't know how soon that'll be here. Like what we were building with Rite of Passage, like would that be possible to incorporate a headset in the next 5 years? But I used to always think about this. Oh, these headsets could allow,
Right.
education. But do you think 5 year time frame, maybe in 20 years, all that'll be here and more, but do you think 5 years is a realistic time frame for those types of more productive, practical use cases? Or do you think in 5 years it's still just like a juiced up entertainment set?
I have this date of like 2035 in that range for the metaverse being a thing. Which to me the metaverse represents um kind of like escaping the constraints of distance and geography. Um, yeah, I think one of the problems right now is the Vision Pro is so new, and so people haven't really built things yet on it. And the whole reason to really release this headset, it's for developers to start making spatial apps and experiences. And out of the gate, it's just floating YouTube screens. And in my mind, what the Vision Pro showed me is that I never really need or want to watch YouTube, sports, or movies in bigger screen. Like the screen size is never a constraint.
Hmm.
Like it's never like, oh, if only it were bigger. I find that as soon as I'm watching the thing, I am in the thing. And I'm not thinking about how big or small it is.
Even if you're not in a set, if you're just, it's just on your TV screen, you're saying.
Yeah, if I'm watching a movie on my phone and it's right here, it's taking up the same peripheral, like the same relative field of view as a big screen that's far
Okay.
away.
Yeah, I got to push back on that. I got to push back on that because, okay, hold on. Yes and no, right? Like I do, spend time watching things on my phone. I spend so much time that I blocked YouTube on my phone. So I get it. Like I totally watch stuff on my phone. But in my apartment, I have this blank wall I'm looking at right now. It's huge. And I have a projector that projects onto that wall. And it's like a 150-inch screen. And the first thing that my girlfriend and I watched on it when I first got it was this space show. It was like I think SpaceX sent them up, but it was like these 6 private citizens who went up in space. It was like a 4-episode miniseries about this. That was the first thing we watched with the big screen. In fact, I'm pretty sure we watched the first episode on the small screen, and then episodes 2, 3, and 4 we watched on the big screen. I mean, it was fundamentally different, and that's not even VR level, right? It's still, but it does sort of feel like you're there because it's as large as life or larger than life. The people look almost as big as actual people versus watching like on your phone or tablet. I do think there's a real difference there. But
I guess what I'm comparing it to true VR experiences where I can turn around and see something there and then walk to, like, I've actually experienced plays in virtual reality where you're actually moving through a whole world, and it's actually the new paradigm of cinema. And to me, it's like, oh, that is something that I can't experience through a screen.
Right. It's a categorical difference rather than difference in degree. Yeah.
Right. And no, I definitely see how, like, there's a difference when you go to a movie theater and it has it's huge with amazing sound. It makes a difference. I think what I've realized is that it's not worth wearing a headset for the gains you get at scale. I'd rather have a projector and have the quality be slightly fuzzy and have it be really big than to have this thing on my face where I can't really read text or see it's just a huge sacrifice for something that is not like a categorically different thing. If you can teleport, that's awesome. If I can explore some world, that's architectural, that's cool. But I was just unconvinced of kind of the flat screen paradigm,
Yeah, totally. The funny thing about the projector too is that like your face is available to I'm watching the show with my girlfriend, we look at each other and laugh when a character says something funny or something like that. That's kind of limited in the Vision Pro. I guess you can sort of see through it, but just any sort of human interaction is suddenly canceled out. So if you're watching alone is one thing, but yeah, I do think you're making a good case that the projector is better in some ways if you're watching with somebody else, with a group of people. So that's fair. So 2035 is when you think there'll be widespread adoption of 3-dimensional true metaverse that you can go into and interact in like a widespread. I mean, sure, it'll be like it already exists in some forms, but you're ballparking about 10 years before it's a widely available, widely adopted, sort of commonly accepted.
Yeah, I think that's like the smartphone moment. Like right now we're in 1994, 1995 of the PC era.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's good. Yeah, interesting.
And that was a revolution, right? And in many ways, the Vision Pro is a revolution, but it still takes a lot to get to the point where everyone's like, oh, I absolutely need this. Like nobody needs the Vision Pro, or the average person does not need the Vision Pro. But once like, hey, but now you can teleport and it's very convincing, everyone will be like, oh, I absolutely need that, Yeah.
Yeah. The parallel is just having, the Apple II or whatever, and it's like, okay, it can do additional things, but it's still whatever. It wasn't networked. There's no internet. So like it was still when we think of, I told you I was at the computer museum and in Mountain View a couple of weeks ago. And they have all these old computers and they seem so hopelessly antiquated. And because we know what's possible once they're connected to the web, and before that, it just seems so limited. Like, okay, you have a better word processor and you can do DOS and things like that. But I think the parallel is that this widespread metaverse adoption is the internet moment for these devices. And, until now, it's like the Apple II being a slightly better word processor is the same as, the Vision Pro being just a slightly better YouTube screen or content viewing experience. So, man, it's so easy to assume that Vision Pro's out and floodgates are open, and in no time, it's just everything's going to change, but it still takes like 5, 10 years. Like it's faster than in the past. But I totally have this tendency to look at a new technology like everything's different forever, starting right now. It's like no, it does take some time for these things to proliferate and get adopted and just be actually useful, which will be relevant to our next conversation, I think. But yeah, it still takes a little time. So
Totally.
nice. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about some of the, unless there's anything else you want to say on Metaverse or Vision Pro.
No, let's jump to Sora. I feel like that's the biggest news of the week.
Yeah. So Sora comes out last, say, Thursday, and it's on-demand generated video from OpenAI. Sam Altman does the thing where he fires up some videos, and then people are asking for, hey, a monkey playing chess, or a bunch of golden retriever puppies playing in the snow, and he's able to generate them on demand. First glance, extremely impressive. I mean,
Oh, that was a live demo? I missed that if it was a live
live
demo.
tweeting, like Mr. Beast
Oh, cool.
replied to his, and so he announces it and like drops some videos, and then like a bunch of people reply, including Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast goes, hey, please don't like replace me and take me out of a job or something.
I saw that. Yeah.
Sam replies, what do you want to see? And he goes, a monkey playing chess. And sure enough, the chessboard's the wrong dimensions and there's not the right pieces, but still it's a monkey. Yeah. So yeah, it was very breathtaking, impressive. It felt like when those GPT-4 screenshots were coming out a year ago, the same day Google releases Gemini, I think they released it, and then Sam deliberately deployed Sora, 2 hours later, just to upstage them. Gemini was, I don't know, I guess the context window was impressive, but it seems so like obviously that they were playing catch up to OpenAI. It's like they have a better version, but it's just a better version of GPT-4, where Sora was the new sexy thing everybody was talking about. Now there's this new woke stuff with Gemini, which I don't know if we want to get to that or not, but what are your thoughts on just that last Thursday? It felt like another paradigm shifting day. And what are your initial thoughts on the AI generated video?
Yeah, I thought it was very calculated and strategic. As in they didn't release it. Like no one has it yet. What I thought was interesting with when GPT-4 came out, it was kind of wild and unhinged. And people were trying to bait it, and it would do scary things. It would teach you how to make prison camps and nuclear bombs and whatever. It would steal content. Like it had no guardrails. And with text, that's scary. With video, I think that would be terrifying. Right? To actually because with visuals, you don't have to process it, you just see it, right? So it makes sense that like the first versions of this that we've seen are puppies playing chess and humans thinking really hard and beautiful views of European cities. Like it's very safe. And it looks amazing, right? If you just compare that to, I remember seeing some AI videos last year, and they're so trippy and weird. They were like bad, like, I mean, the Star Wars one was the best version of it, and it was psychedelic. It was like a dream, you know? There's the Will Smith eating spaghetti. There's these like bizarre Domino's commercials. And this didn't have that feeling. This just felt real, you know? And there's something to say about that. And I think it's like, I think it's actually less truthful when it's realistic. As in the messy subconscious of what it really is would scare people, but they're not going to present that at its demo. And I'm sure when they trained this thing, they're not feeding in war footage. They're not feeding in pornography. They're very limited in what they're allowing it to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting take though. So the real, just explain that a little further. You're saying that the real stuff doesn't feel as genuine as sort of the messy, weird, psychedelic things that they're not showing us. Like there's something almost antiseptic about these really clean images of a puppy playing the snow. Is that what you're getting at? And there's like this deep.
They're perfect. It's perfect B-roll footage, right?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. Or the one that really got me, I don't know if you saw, there's like a Italian grandmother like making gnocchi, and she's like standing in her kitchen smiling. And I sent that to my girlfriend, and she was just like, wow, that's like, she said it was just like eerie and creepy, but it was like a little too perfect. It's a little too polished and whatever. So yeah, there's definitely, yeah, it's just a glimpse. It's still, my initial reaction was to be wildly impressed. I think the biggest thing that hit me was when you see the insane video of Will Smith eating spaghetti from a year ago to what it can do today. My natural jump is to say, well, it's just going to continue forever. It's getting better and better. What it's going to do in a year from now, or 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, it's going to replace all of Hollywood. You know, Peter Diamandis tweets out "R.I.P. Hollywood," and my buddies who's a film director here in LA is texting me freaking out about this, and so that was my initial read. Now, I've since read some other things, done some thinking, and talked to some people, and there's a really interesting counterpoint that's come up. I sent you this article. It was just talking about, let's see, let's get the title of it, Subprime Intelligence by Edward Zitron. And what I really liked about his piece is that he highlights the shortcomings of the Sora videos. Now, at first glance, it's so easy just to focus on what's amazing about them. Wow, that woman's face looks so realistic. Those puppies look really real. That monkey looks photorealistic. But in almost all of them, there's little imperfections. And my assumption is that, well, if they already went from Will Smith spaghetti to this, they can work out those kinks in no time, and it's just going to be infinite, video, and all, the traditional Hollywood players are going to go away and get replaced by this. He makes a really interesting point. He's saying they're not kinks to work out. They're actually hard limits. They're restraints that come when you try to when you try to mimic knowledge with mathematics. He makes this really compelling case that these AI models, they actually don't know anything. When we think about our environment, or even we think about text that we read, there's just an infinite number of contextual assumptions we have about the world that are baked in because we've been living in this world for however many decades. And these machines have none of that. They're sort of in a vacuum, taking input, converting it to math, and then using math to create text or video. And so when you run into these constraints, they're really fundamental and can't be overcome with just slight tweaks. Like there's just an infinite ocean of contextual knowledge that we have that they don't have. And he says that he thinks that leaders of AI companies really, or maybe people in general, just underestimate how perfect the world is when it appears to us, and how difficult it is to recreate with all these little details. Like we're always going to notice the details that are wrong because the world presents itself as so impeccably perfect to us. And so what do you think about these kinks, not just being small tweaks to iron out, but in fact, these hard constraints that occur when you try to generate text or video via this backend, floating point matrices in mathematics?
Yeah, I agree that I think we're basically at the limits of what large language models can do in themselves, right? Like I don't like we've fed it enough data, text or video, for it to create these things. And I think the tunnel vision we have is that large language models are the entirety of what AI is. Before we even AI research has been around since the 60s and 70s, and even up until the 2000s, everybody was approaching this problem through symbolic logic, which is knowledge. It is true knowledge, as in there's relationships and there's proven variables that are always reliably sound, and you know things. And there are always huge bottlenecks in that approach. And I see a large language model as basically the human subconscious, where it's all associations and patterns. And I feel like if you look at what Sora is, it is like a single scene from a dream, right? And how dreams, you've seen enough faces in your life where you're looking at somebody and it's like, wow, you're in a dream and that's a real face. But the face can melt into someone else's pretty easily, or one little detail could be wrong and you realize, oh, wait a second, am I in a dream? So I think that parallel is important to realize, that a large language model alone will always be a kind of dream. And that's kind of why I was saying that I like the weird Will Smith videos better, because it had the aesthetic of a dream and you saw things warp into each other. And that's truly what this is. And dude, GPT-2, like playing with that was one of the most fun I ever had, because it was so unconstrained and weird. It wasn't useful. It was strictly hallucinations. And it was fascinating because you could see how it was thinking. But I think OpenAI, in the way that they're parenting these models, they're trying to make it seem like it's not a dream. They're trying to make it seem reliable, but in reality, it is actually just a dream. And we need to be building other symbolic layers on top of it to approximate true intelligence, which, like he's saying, is very reliable and stable and sound. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Say more about that last point you just made. You're building other things on top of it to create real knowledge. And what does that even look like? Or is that just pretty far in the future? Like I can't really imagine what that looks like.
So it actually already exists and it's been around for a long time. Like they've made an AI that could write Beatles sheet music some time ago, like in the 2010s maybe. And they've had sheet music AI um, into the 80s, I think, right? And so the whole idea is like if you were to study, and the Beatles AI is a perfect example, right? You can actually analyze the hundreds of Beatles songs and understand that there's certain probabilities in how they would shape a verse and how they would loop choruses. And I've visually analyzed this. I understand the symbolic logic in how to shape a Beatles song. But if you look at Jukebox, which is the AI Beatles stuff that we have, it has no sense for song structure or how the Beatles shape a full 3 minute arc. They've just dumped their whole catalog into it, and it can synthetically recreate a single second of the Beatles and then connect it to 1 second in the future. So it's kind of like it has the voice of the Beatles, but it these language models don't have the structure of the Beatles,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We've already solved how to imitate structure. We've had that since the 80s and 90s, and we can do that. And I think we're kind of just in this all happened so fast that I'm sure they're connecting these dots as we speak. But it's kind of just about like, hey, now that we know how to do a verse chorus, can't we just plug the language model into it so you can have something that's like a proper Beatles song and it sounds like their voice too?
Hmm. Yeah, what's coming up for me is it's like the large language model is like the cement, but then the symbolic understanding is like rebar that like reinforces and actually makes it
Yes.
strong and robust
Yeah.
and durable. Because you can have all the cement you want, but at the end of the day, it can kind of just crack apart. Does that sort of make sense? It's like
Right.
it's not it's not durable. Like the AI videos, they're not durable, and I've been convinced they're not durable enough as it sits today to recreate like a television series or a Hollywood
No,
level,
not at all.
because they would like all those little imperfections are like cracks in the cement. And if you're not reinforced, because how do you make a building with cement? You create all these I've seen it like in Santa Monica, they're building all these new apartment units and they create all these structures out of rebar and then fill it in with cement. But the rebar actually comes first. And so maybe that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
Uh, but
It's
yeah.
like jazz. It's free association. It's like Kerouac, the language model. It's just like endlessly forward and out, and it's oozy. Um, but knowledge has a structure and a hierarchy to it. And that's why I don't think AI can write great essays right now because it doesn't have a natural sense for what a good form is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right. It's just this guy, it's so simple the way he puts it, but he just keeps saying it doesn't know anything. They don't actually know anything. But it's so hard to delineate that in the mind of an average user because it sure as hell seems like it
Seems
does.
like it.
It
And it's a
absolutely,
sycophant. Like it tells you that, like, yeah, whatever you want.
yeah.
And it tells
Yeah.
you that it does understand what you're saying when it really doesn't.
Which is so it's so it's like you have to believe beyond what your eyes are showing you. Because again, I can just go ask it anything text-based, and as long as it's within like a reasonable realm that I'm asking about it, it can spit out an answer that's quite good. And so it's like, okay, but he just kept repeating that phrase over and over again. It doesn't actually know anything. Now, the extension he draws from that, which is really interesting, is that he claims they're interesting, surprising, but not particularly useful. And he's saying, we're rapidly approaching the top of generative AI's S curve. So there's this rapid growth, and then things will really slow down. Now, at first glance, for me, it seems hard to believe because A, just the whole world is investing infinite money in these things, and B, there is this feeling of inevitability. When you see the video last year of spaghetti, you see the video this year, my mind jumps to, well, next year it's going to make an equivalent leap because I'm not thinking about these hard constraints. When he makes this case, it was really interesting to me because he goes, this line really stands out. He goes, I am completely out of patience when it comes to being told what it will do in the future. And yet that's so much of the dialogue right now, right? That's so much of the dialogue. It's inevitable that Sam's going to make insane amount of money and wants to go raise $7 trillion, everybody's jumping into this space. New startups cropping up in every single vertical that are related to AI. And he just goes, "There's a product that can only sort of kind of do something really going to create trillions of dollars of economic value." It's like one thing to have a video or a screenshot of GPT go viral on Twitter, but if you're actually trying to do enterprise functions in a business with AI, or a feature-length film, these imperfections go from little kinks to ignore to the hard constraints he's talking about. So how do you think about that? Like, there's still so much AI hype if I hop on Twitter right now, but this like really strong doubt is starting to bubble up. And he even acknowledges, this guy, again, his name is Edward Zitron. He acknowledges that nobody really knows, like, will these kinks be overcome, or are they hard constraints? But he makes a very compelling case that they're hard constraints. And until I read this, I hadn't fully considered that.
Yeah, I think what if you really understand the technology and the challenges to solve and what those challenges unlock and who's working on it and what the pace of it, if you're really in the AI field, I do think you can see 5 to 10 years in the future. Like, I very much can see into the future in VR in ways that most people can't. I can't quite do that with AI, but I think he's right that I think large language models are at the top of the S curve. Um, and but like that, I just think we're totally over indexing on that one component, right? Because we haven't even added memory into the equation yet, which they just released like last week. They announced, by the way, memory's coming very soon, which means now as you talk to GPT, it remembers your whole conversation, all your preferences, and it starts to compound in how it knows you with your knowledge. And like that might be a bigger user experience breakout than the very premise of just having one-off chats. Um, so I don't know. And so does that make sense where we are at the top of an S curve? But that's like saying, oh, since we invented HTTP or these certain protocols, it's 1995. What else is there? The protocol is saturated. It's like, well, the internet is actually a conglomeration of all these standards and protocols and features that build on each other.
Right.
And I think it's kind of the same deal.
Yeah, that does make sense. So it's, if you're just limited to the LLM domain, it seems like we're hitting a hard limit, but there's all sorts of other things that will plug into this LLM capability that will allow it to transcend these limitations, basically. For now, there's some pause and there's some sort of speed limit, but it doesn't mean that it's an absolute speed limit for all of AI. It's just this instance of AI has these particular limitations that will limit it for now.
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some reassurance in reading this, or Eric Cole has sort of bounced off this guy's ideas to talk about different ways in which LLMs or AI more generally is limited. And he's kind of reassuring, because it did feel like when GPT-4 came out, here we are building Rite of Passage. It's like, man, is this just gonna, software eats the world? It's just gonna eat all human written essays, or the language learning thing or whatever. So it's nice to see that there are limits. But I guess you're saying generally I guess if you had to say, does this make you, bearish on AI in general? You'd be a no. It's just in this particular narrow frame of reference. Is that right?
Right. I think we're not seeing the full picture, right?
Okay.
Like I think like right now I'm building this ontology of what an essay is in every dimension: idea, structure, and voice. And there are examples, and there's a gradient scale of good to bad, and definitions. And you could imagine and basically what that is symbolic qualitative logic on top of prose, right? And if you fuse that with the GPT-5, you could imagine that, oh, that could be an essay generator of like a sublime nature.
Just gonna say, I feel like I got a glimpse of the future. Like, I know you love essays and you're breaking it down for the love of the game, but I can already see you are basically fashioning the rebar to combine with the LLMs to allow for people to generate more sophisticated GPT written essays. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand that that is an inevitable way that it might be used. I personally find that as I am just discovering the rebar on my own, that when I show up and run the typewriter, it comes through automatically, because our own heads are these weird
Yeah.
pattern machines. And in the short term, my goal would be to build a tool that can understand these patterns and that a writer could put in their essay, their own human written draft, and would be able to analyze your essay based on these patterns and then give you feedback and help you upshore it. So like if I had control over it, if I were building the tool, it wouldn't write for you. It would be your platonic coach. Platonic as it knows the idealized forms of here are the components that every essay needs. But you could imagine that could go rogue where someone could kind of loop it into some generator and then it just can write infinite great essays.
At a much higher level. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating though. Just the positive case of what you're looking to build is really, really interesting. So I mean, I think that metaphor really works. You're fashioning the rebar or the different varieties of rebar that you can, we suddenly have infinite cement. Boom. Okay. Half of construction is solved,
Right.
but it's only half. Like, go try to build a building with infinite cement. Like, good luck having that building house, people as an apartment unit or something like that. It's impossible. But if you can match that with sort of templatized rebar, you can merge the two, and that's really interesting, man.
And template's an interesting word because I think that's where we're at now with GPT-4, where you can give it a template and it's very kind of rigid. It can do one thing and it can fill a rebar into templates. And that's exactly what it can do. But I think what I'm trying to put my finger on are not templates, but patterns. As in there's a little more complexity and they can be expressed in a lot of different ways depending on the specific content. And then it's not just one pattern, but these 27 patterns that all interlock. And it's kind of it's even hard for the human mind to keep in mind 27 patterns as you're writing. They're really these editing filters that you can turn on and off at different phases in the process to see if you conform to this one pattern,
It's almost like see how far we can take this metaphor. Like, those feel like Lego blocks to me, like 27 Lego blocks of rebar, if we're still using the rebar metaphor. Does that make sense? Like there are these recurring patterns of rebar, basically. And I don't know if this breaks down, but like, I guess ordinarily when you're building a building, creating your essay, people have to sort of pound in their own rebar, and it's very irregular. I mean, if somebody's a really skilled essayist, they have their own patterns of rebar they fall back upon, and you're abstracting that out to these 27, and it's not going to be all encompassing, but you're going to hopefully come pretty close. I'm sure you're imagining you're going to come pretty close, but then maybe some really quirky essayist, there's some other funky types of rebar that you're not encompassing, but you're getting 90 to 95% of them with your 27 patterns, right? And really good writers right now can sort of intuit their way or otherwise to these rebar patterns, and bad writers, the rebars are all over the place, crisscrossing, and it's just a damn mess or whatever. And then LLMs have no rebar at all. And you're saying there's one world, the sort of worst world is which you have infinite concrete, and then the rebar gets infinitely generated by the LLMs as well, and it's just these synthetically created buildings. But what you're saying is what you want to create is, okay, infinite concrete if people want to use it, but people are still shaping their own rebar, but then they can automatically check their rebar Lego blocks that they're making by hand against your library or catalog of commonly used rebar Lego pieces. I think that works. Does it make sense?
Close. I think the way I would phrase it is, in general, I think what the best case of what AI could do is if it takes care of a lot of the logical processing, it lets people be more fluid and associative and creative and feminine and just let it loose. So what I think the future of writing could be is effectively logging, typewriter writing, just riffing. And so I could imagine just like, oh, I have a thought, let me riff for 2,000 words. And it's just human concrete out of my head. But I've externalized all the forms that I personally like. I can shoot my own rebar through my own custom Lego blocks, and it helps me shape my my stream, if that makes sense.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Right. So the concrete or whatever is still coming from the human. But that's more interesting because GPT, I mean, you could use the exact same process to create like a less shitty version of a GPT generated essay. Maybe right now it's a 5 out of 10, and working with your existing rebar, you pump in the GPT generated cement and it goes to like a 7.5 out of 10. But there's still some limit because the cement is still synthetically generated just from other past incarnations of cement. But with the humans supplying this unique one of one, subtle perceptions cement. Without the rebar, it's just kind of a mess right now, and they have to try to do it all by hand, and some of it turns out good, a lot of it is kind of shitty. If you have this and I think the key there too is that you have your like platonic forms of rebar Lego blocks, but then they can then be further customized based on who's the user. I think I have that right. And then
Yeah.
you combine these like bespoke rebar Lego blocks structures with bespoke one of one perceptions, insights, logs, cement, and you're able to build buildings that are uniquely yours. They're still very unique, but at a rate that far exceeds what's possible today.
Yeah, like I'm at a point where I'm creating 10 logs per day, and they're good logs. They're like good impressions, they're my experiences, but they're not essays, you know? And I could see by 25 years, 2029, like I could turn all of those logs, shoot the logs through my system, and it generates an 1,000-word essay instantly for each log. And maybe they won't be perfect, maybe I'll need to edit it a little bit, but it'll be effectively me and how I would do it if I were to do it manually. Um,
Yeah, that's really compelling. It helps give me the bigger picture of what's so motivating about trying to deconstruct essays into these forms, other than just it's enjoyable for its own sake. I got to read a bit of an excerpt from this Emerson quote I sent you. It was from Emerson's biography, A Mind on Fire. I've been reading a lot of Emerson the last couple of weeks, just really inspired. And his biographer says, a certain phase of his life, he goes, Emerson was now trying to capture not just major conclusions and insights, but the slightest, most evanescent hints and glimmers that rose to the surface of his mind and then as quickly sank from sight. Right? He wants to. Emerson's journal showed that he fished along the edges of consciousness, eager to note down the smallest fresh suggestion or hint of a suggestion. He tried to recall and write down dreams, first impressions. Let's see what else. Yeah. It's just concerned to explore and then to save impulses, spurts, exaggeration, the most fleeting and evanescent flowers of the mind. Woo! Fascinating, right? Like he was doing a very analog version of this, obviously, but it's like that's the thing that's irreducibly human. That's the thing
Right.
that no LLM ever can replicate until we understand consciousness, right? If you think about, yeah, it's just really compelling, dude. Consciousness in the human mind, the brain, is this infinitely generative source from whence it flows. We do not know. Like we don't know where it comes from, but it just generates this endless stream of thoughts, insights. You metabolize reality and your unique one of one flavor. You, Michael Dean, me, Will Mann, it generates these thoughts, and most of them go unnoticed or disregarded, or we are on our phone so much that we have this evacuation of interiority that we were talking about. But what writers since the beginning of time have done is freeze those and share those unique impressions with the world. Like I always talk about Pessoa, this writer we both adore. Like he printed his consciousness onto the page. I can go inside the brain of a guy living in Portugal in 1925, and it's remarkable. And I can see so many parallels to my brain. But you're allowing people to not just get these hints that only a small portion of which can then go turned into some great essay. You can actually automatically repackage the raw material in an interesting way that's ready for public consumption. And so it could just have this Cambrian explosion of idea sharing between minds. I think I have that right.
But also, what's interesting is reading an essay that is generated by a synthetic you based on your actual logs might actually be a revelation in itself.
About
Because
yourself, for yourself.
for yourself, right? It's like you're reading something that comes from some essence of you, because this language model not only has the original insight that is the seed. There's a seed of randomness still. It's like, boom, okay, I have 300 words on what I saw 20 minutes ago. It's channeling it through your platonic ideas of what makes an essay. And again, this is not rigid. There's infinite possibilities within this thing. And based on the random thing you put in, that affects, if your rules are good enough, it affects how it takes form. And it'll be perfect in a theoretical degree. but it also has access to everything you've ever written before. So it's taking all of those insights, it's taking your full hyper library of what you wish you had time to read, and it's plugging those insights into you. And so if you think of it, it's a borderline religious experience, right? Where basically your log is a question, it's a prayer, and you're asking, like, show me what is the grand insight behind this. And then all of this weird technical magic happens. And what you're being met with is like the voice of God. It's your prayer answered in a 1,000 word thing. And it's going to hit you. It's like, it's going to be, the revelation that, like, for example, when I publish an essay, I'm so intimately close with it by spending 50 hours on it that I'm numb to it. I don't even see it anymore. And I give it to someone else and they might have some great effect because it's new to them. But to me, it's like, or whatever, I'm sick of it. But I get that experience that someone else had, you know? It actually just comes from not existing to straight into my consciousness, you know?
This is really, really, really interesting. I have a bunch of thoughts. So yeah, I'm starting to really get it, and it's really clicked with me. So a few things why I find this really interesting. Well, one thing that just immediately comes to mind. It's like the recursive AI learning loop that we talk about that people fear, but like deployed in like a human way for yourself, because you have this infinite ocean of insights inside your brain. I mean, what's one of my favorite quotes that hangs on my wall in my apartment? No structure more complex than the human brain, one wet kilogram within which spin universes. I think about this all the time. Like, I think about my own mind as this infinite galaxy. Dude, this is the metaphor. Your mind is like this galaxy, and then like you're only able to, we're like limited to like the local celestial neighborhood of, okay, like what stars can you see with like the naked eye? Like that's what you can really explore right now of your own mind. But this gives you like light speed travel through your own brain to like sort of almost like teleport to different parts of the galaxy, pull them back in, and just have a way richer experience of the galaxy in your mind. We got to refine that a bit, but that's basically right. I think that's basically right. So number one. Number two, it's just like this combinatorial explosive output from your own brain, right? It's just like you can understand your own mind in much richer detail, and then the things that you're then able to go share with other minds is like infinitely more rich. But then if other minds around you are also doing this, then there's like this rich like symphony of different minds. So each individual mind gets a lot richer. Imagine if we were both doing this, and you're already logging, and it's like makes me be like, man, I got to really be logging here. I want to talk about your technique and stuff because I totally see it. So then like think about the infinite richness of Pousseau's mind, but they were all on scraps of paper in a trunk, and it took like scholars like decades to piece it together. And then you have the Book of Disquiet, and I'm looking at this thing like I've never in my life. I think I believe that the Book of Disquiet is my favorite book I've ever read. I really believe that because I can't get over it. Like it's remarkable. I've never read something where the subtlety of perception observed by a guy in Lisbon in 1925 so directly maps my own experience. Like I'm sitting at LAX watching someone flip burgers at the Habit Burger Grill, I'm about to jet off to whatever trip. And this was like a year ago. And I'm sitting there like, man, what is this guy's life like? That is a tough life. And Pessoa writes the exact same thing. And that's just one example of very subtle insight that I noticed here in the 2020s and he noticed in the 1920s. And it's like, we're linked across time and space. Emerson, the things I was reading with him yesterday, it's this visceral feeling of connection. But of all the minds that have ever lived, think about what fraction of a percentage are actually saved and recorded in a way that I can go have that resonance. So it's like we're missing all the infinite potentials for resonance between minds, minus a select few who actually wrote stuff down, and then they have to get preserved through time and all that. And so our ability to even find these things and then read through them is so limited. And then their ability to express is still like relatively limited. They're doing the best they could with pencil and paper. But the idyllic vision of what you're describing, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's that each individual mind can express itself in a way that's far richer than ever before. Like, what is the call of like all of Western philosophy? Know thyself. So step one, each individual mind can know itself at far greater fidelity. You can pull far more to the infinite galaxy, the infinite ocean of consciousness than you ever could before. So it's just, it is a one-player game. It's a far richer experience of living. And then you can share that, and you can share much greater volume. And then other people can then use the system to consume what others are sharing and just find infinitely more resonances. And so each individual is a lot richer, and then you can interact with all these other minds in a much richer way. I know this is sort of like very idyllic and like the starry-eyed explanation of it, but there's really something there. I think that's, hopefully that resonates.
Yeah, your thoughts aren't legible to anyone but you, and so logging is the attempt to like at least just get like a very fuzzy map of the continents in your head. And I'm close to like maybe a little bit over 500,000 words, and I don't remember what's in there. Like I can't tell you what was in there in December 2 months ago, let alone what was in there 2 years ago. And so it is totally unconscious to me, right? It's cool that I can manually go back and remember it, but it's a very lot as logging is still a lossy process, but it is like the closest we can ever have. Like, and I think the more you write, the more you practice, the closer what you put is going to match what you're experiencing. And Pessoa nailed that, right? He could really articulate what he was going through. And yeah, it's just kind of interesting that every single thought you have can go through this grand orchestration. So it requires you to have a theory and a preference of how to put things together. You have to kind of be a craftsman. And to your point where it's like it'll fuse with other minds, right? This app Recollect kind of already has this where you can actually subscribe to RSS feeds and other Substacks. And every time they post, it just goes into your database. So then as you write and Recollect, that stuff can be coming up. And I feel like I'm trying to think of like, what would Eric Hubble say as like a counter to this? And he would say something which I agree with, which is part of writing is the enjoyment of doing the thinking yourself. Like you actually have to go through the process of making a long form essay to really figure out what it is you think. Your fleeting first impression isn't going to be baked enough to make something great. And I think that's true in the sense that some people will be lazy and they're going to define their script once and just throw in some tweets and like, look, now I have this engine for daily newsletters and I can just step back and live the 4-hour work week and not even be a thinker anymore. It all just does it for me. But I think there's a world where you're continuously refining your script and the paper and the pages come out and then you wrestle with it. You disagree with it. You ask it more questions. You can imagine the in the future, it's the AI who's prompting us. You know what I mean? And so we're still thinking. So we put in our log, it generates the essay, then it asks us a question, and we write a whole essay back to it. And then it factors that in and writes another essay, then it asks us more questions. So it's potentially this like Socratic process that we have with this, I'll call it like a daemon. It's kind of like this external weird, it seems conscious, but it's kind of this weird complex that comes from us. And like Vervaeke talks about this, where it's like he's been into IFS and how we have all of these parts, and there's these versions of ourselves that are in us, and that's kind of what this is a machine version of that we can talk with now.
It's just so interesting. I think that the whole thing where he's going, the imagined response of Eric Howell saying, "Oh well, there's a purity to the essay writing process, and that undercuts that." It's weirdly the inverse of what we're saying. Remember last week we were saying all the hype of Vision Pro is very legible, and the invisible amputations are very hard to see and or bear out over time. In a weird way, I don't know how this all connects, but it's exact opposite of that. Because there's this other thing that happens where new things come along to disrupt old things. And in some instances, it's actually the thing that's being lost is really visible. And you can point to be like, look, this is the thing we're missing. I like waking up at 5 a.m., sitting down with my coffee and slaving away at the writing process. And eventually gold comes out on the other side. However, and then you say, oh, if that goes away, what a loss that would be, and this is wrong. Michael, what you're proposing is profane because it's up my routine of 5 a.m. with my coffee doing my writing. But what that fails to see is the explosive possibility that gets unleashed when this happened. Okay, picture Eric is a blacksmith. And let's use 1750. I always love to come back to 1750, or really this would more be like early 1800s is probably the mid 1800s, whatever. He's like a blacksmith, and he has perfected the craft of like metallurgy, and he's able to, you've seen blacksmiths. So you ever go to, like, I'm from, Virginia, Colonial Williamsburg, they put the metal rod in the fire, and they have a hammer, and they're very skilled, and they shape it, and eventually you have like a fence or whatever. And then let's say industrial revolution comes along, and it's like, hey, you don't need to do that anymore. Like, we have these, like, whatever, steel processing plants that can create all this stuff, and you don't need to do it. And so, like, the artistry of being, a blacksmith is lost. And that's not wrong. But think about somebody who's obsessed with metallurgy now, or like what you can make with metal now. Like, back then you could make what? Like a pot holder, a fence, whatever. Like, there's just like a limited set of things you could make with metal. Like, all the things we could make with metal was just like this little bounded set. And now, if you're interested in metallurgy and the cutting out of it's so far beyond the capacity of a blacksmith in the 1800s to even imagine. But think about the most sophisticated, like a Tesla, or the most sophisticated things we're able to make with metal. It exceeds the blacksmith's wildest conceptions of what metal can do. And so I'm just trying to say the same thing with writing and ideas. Like, we're like, Pessoa printed his consciousness onto a page. Okay, but how do you do it? He scraps of paper and a damn pencil and sketch it out over decades. And then other people to come in and spend years compiling it all together. It's like the most badass, contraption he made of like these infinite number of like blacksmith parts together. But then compare that to like a Tesla. Like, he couldn't have even conceived of a Tesla. But I think what I'm getting at is like, dude, when you combine like what you're describing, the ability to pull these infinitely rich insights from the mind, and then, by the way, you combine that with other, capacity of generative AI. I'm talking about these like wild terms and ecstatic terms, because that's all I can just point out the potential of it. I can't give you that many specifics other than knowing that you're describing a very big picture. You're describing this process of pulling a lot more raw material, like, out of the average human brain, and then packaging it in a certain way, and then allowing different brains to interact like that. And then whatever other tools we have, because think about a Tesla, it's not just metal. It's including like all sorts of other engineering that didn't even exist when the blacksmith is dinking away on his, fence that he's building. Does that make sense? But like, you have a way richer ability to shape metal at like an industrial scale, combined with like the software and all the stuff that goes into a Tesla. And then this thing is still made of metal, but it's 100,000 times more sort of brilliant or whatever than a blacksmith could have conceived. But these are the levels of change that we're talking about. I think almost everyone's frame of reference is way too narrow with this stuff. Like, it was that's why I come back to the Venkatesh, like the Jeffersonian farmers analogy. Like, you just are bounded by like your frame of reference on reality. But that's just the limitation of your mind. In absolute terms, those boundaries are utterly false. You know how I know? Because I can look back and understand the boundaries that people in the past had, and know that we've transcended them to some psychedelic future they never could have imagined. That's not going to stop. In fact, it's actually getting faster. And so I think it's a lot more interesting, instead of being like Howell's theoretical opposition and saying why this is bad. No, shit, what would it look like to go from a blacksmith making a frying pan to creating a Tesla? Like, what's the future version of a Tesla when it comes to pulling ideas out of your consciousness and combining it with these other capacities and affordances? It's breathtaking.
I have a funny question that kind of hits at this at a funny angle. And it's, the question is, what is more important? Is it the soul of the blacksmith and his revelation from making the pan? Or is it the object that is made? And you can apply this thing to a writer too. What is more important? The theoretical perfection of the work that is produced by the essay, or is it the process in making it? And
Okay.
I can actually go both ways. I'm like,
Well,
when I think of the blacksmith, I'm like, oh, it's all about the blacksmith. But when you ask me, to me, it's about the finished works. It's about the essay,
it's a perfect question, because there is no pun intended, there is no black and white answer. There's not, because this is the key to prevent me from being seen as just this ultimate like techno utopist, even if I'm drifting that way in this conversation. Like, it isn't necessarily better from the blacksmith's perspective. In fact, it's far worse. But his perspective is bounded to his frame of reference on reality. So this is, I always used to make this point about the die progress units. I've said this before. You pulled Thomas Jefferson out of 1750, drop him in 2024. His mind would just be turned to goo. He wouldn't even be able to, because it's so beyond his like frame of reference of what's possible. So within the blacksmith's frame of reference, it's for sure worse. And you can imagine taking a blacksmith to the future and showing him like the Tesla factory in Fujian, China. And it's just these automaton Chinese people just doing like a single drill. He would be heartbroken. Like in that angle, it's so far worse. Like it's absolutely worse, right? Because like the blacksmith gets such joy out of being the one who shapes the metal and the satisfaction of seeing these finely crafted
He's
pieces.
the
all
sole
over the
creator of this thing.
the feeling of the grit under his fingernails and the heat of the fire, it gives his work life meaning and purpose, and all of that goes away when you have the Tesla factory in Shanghai or whatever. So from his perspective, it is worse, but it's this inexorable progress. Like imagine, and this probably existed, by the way, as the Industrial Revolution came around. Imagine people passing out pamphlets to try to argue for, let's not build this factory because of the values of the blacksmith. It's sort of like adorable in a way. Like they're not wrong, but they're also like so wildly wrong. It's a paradox. Like they're both at the same time. Imagine a pamphlet. I'm specifically using that word, a pamphlet. Like that technology is going to be utterly transcended, right? Like the blacksmith is going to be utterly transcended. Like it all just gets transcended. This is oosification, by the way. This is oosification. And what's hard about it is that it dissolves all the like values and certainties that we hold dear in the present, but it makes way for this transcendent, unimaginably rich future. The difference is it's going to happen within our lifetimes instead of across generations. They'll happen within lifetimes, and so we have to have these conversations to get ready for it. But so sorry to answer your question. Like from the perspective of the blacksmith, in many ways you can point to it is worse. But I'd rather live in a society where we have Teslas and we're not. If I want a new frying pan, I buy it on Amazon. I don't have to have a blacksmith come make it. And then there are like gaps of the soul and things like that, which we're confronting right now. And I think that's where the humanities and the liberal arts, by the way, the stuff you're working on right now comes in to fill that gap. But God, it's such a rich question. But I think it's worse and better at the same time. Just like, dude, the Yeoman farmers of yore and the rolling hills of Pennsylvania in the 1770s would look at modern day Philadelphia and just be just devastated with how people live. We've lost touch with nature and all these things. Yeah, but we got all this other great stuff. And so it's just like, this is the way of the world. But we have this rare opportunity to be within one lifetime experience like what used to take hundreds of years. It's all compressed. We go from centuries to decades, and that's quite exciting. Now it can be so fear-inducing, but if you can, I think part of the point of having these conversations is to overcome the fear and grapple with what's coming, and then we can embrace with open arms, knowing these analogies to what's happened in the past and how there's a lot of what you're describing is so much richer than Erico will theoretically wake up at 5 a.m. to like write his essay for 3 hours. Like it's so much richer than that. Just like the Tesla, so much blacksmith.
Well, I think what's happening is like the question comes to it's inputs versus outputs. It's the human who's making the thing versus the actual end product, which could be miraculous and convenience. And there's kind of an unquestionable efficiency of pushing forward, right? Of course, we're not going to stop the production of cars. Of course, we're not going to tear down the cities and go back to farms. But what we're seeing now is there's no end in sight of technological progress. And we're going to get to a point where things are unbelievably convenient. And I really like this phrase, tyrannical convenience, where the end objects and the processes are going to be so void of friction that we can basically have everything and anything we want instantly, to the point where, oh, I have some little idea, let me write it down, and boom, it turns into a work of art that is good enough to be in today's Western canon, just from a thought. And everyone can do that. And it's like, that's kind of amazing and unbelievable. And like, of course, that feels like it would usher in some golden age, and maybe it will. But there's a certain edge where convenience robs us, the invisible amputation. And I really like the example you brought up, where in this case, it seems like maybe the negatives are actually so obvious and we're not seeing the positives. And it kind of points to it's not either or. It's always a very nuanced thing where you have to go in and understand what are the visible and invisible implications.
I think we're blind to the upside here. Like just within the domain, just the domain you're describing.
Writing.
Like, yeah, which writing is just to me a vehicle of sharing your consciousness. Okay, like just take a few things as true. I mean, the first article I ever, or really second article I ever wrote in Rite of Passage was called Your Infinity Machine. And remember, I've probably done this riff before, but I talk about how a deck of playing cards, 52 playing cards, have 10 to the 67 possibilities of combinations, which is there is 10 to the 24 stars in the universe. It's an unfathomably large number. And so I just had this phrase in there that said, if there's that much infinite potential hiding within 52 laminate rectangles, what can you do with 100 billion neurons? I think the thing we underrate is the infinite capacity of every mind. I feel like this is like my main argument in life right now, is that we have this precious attention and all these forces try to extract. It's extractive because people know how precious your attention is, and they pull from it. They hey, look at this, watch this video, read this article. Dude, it's so much more interesting to have all these billions of human minds like actually expressing themselves in really rich terms. And then there's this funny like arms race between our ability to express and create and our ability to consume. And I mean consumption in a positive direction here, because you're saying, okay, you list all the potential things you want to read, but you still are having taste selecting those things. And then when you're combining like your rich like logging process, you had a term for a hypertext or something, like all the shit you want to read that you haven't read combined with your log thoughts. I'm just getting this image of like these infinite swirls of like creativity where the human minds are unearthing more and more, but then our ability to consume what other minds are saying is also rising really quickly. And so it's just like this, I don't know, I think these images sometimes like this, each human is like gone from like, if each mind is just like a flicker of a candle, and then suddenly each mind is like this firecracker like shooting out, and you can combine those into superstructures to create like ideas and things that we've never conceived of before. So maybe with this tyranny of convenience, the like counterpoint to all of that is there's infinite richness to plumb in the depths of the human mind. And so it's this like renaissance of the liberal arts, the softer stuff, to help us, give us purpose and direction and something to do when you have this tyrannical convenience, and also a means of just processing like how to live with all these new ideas about how to live in this time of like tyrannical convenience. Hopefully this makes sense. I know I won't
It
even.
does. They're almost like two poles, and it could flow either way, or both could kind of happen at the same time. And they probably will both happen at the same time. And I think
What are the two?
you'll
Define the two poles.
one is that things become so convenient where you never have to leave your house or see real people, because you have your best friends are synthetic and they're bots, and your entertainment is generated for you, and you're in your custom hallucination. And it's just, it is a world of maximum pleasure and inconvenience. And you're not necessarily concerned with bringing the interiority out, interiority,
Yeah.
it's a funny word, out of your head, because like you don't even, there's no incentives to do that. And the easy move is to just live a life of leisure. And so all the companies know that that's the core human desire, and they're gonna build bubbles that allow us all to do that. And I think it's gonna be kind of a you're gonna like, I don't think like OpenAI is right now, it's like the mass market large language model. But if you want to do some really trippy creative stuff, like you can't do it through there. You're gonna have to get your own models. And I could see these very like niche kind of tools for people who are trying to excavate their own mind, use it.
I think it's really well put. Sorry.
Yeah.
Excavate their own mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, man. Like I think it's I was reading Emerson yesterday. Actually, I'm just going to stand up real quick and find this actual physical book, because I think it's the perfect thing that illustrates this point. And it goes right along with what you're just saying. So you're like, maybe that people will realize that OpenAI is just sort of this off the shelf thing, but what's really interesting is helping, enhancing people's ability to excavate their own minds and then share that with others. Okay, so I'll show you two things real quick. It's in my backpack, but I'll pull it out. This book, what does this look like to the average person in the age of AI? Like, what does this look like? It looks like a joke. This is battered, beaten coffee. It's probably printed in the 1992 or something. This looks like a joke. It's like we have infinite YouTube videos with catchy thumbnails and, all this shit. We have AI, and then this same thing, like the poetry of Emily Dickinson, like poems, like, oh, what a joke. Like, come on. Like, how does this stack up against infinite YouTube videos?
Right.
And let me tell you something. I had this thought yesterday. It's the perfect thing to dovetail off our conversation. Like, there is infinity hiding within this book. I can't, overstate how much more interesting and how much more stimulated I was reading certain pages in this book than all the YouTube videos I've ever watched in my entire life combined. I know it sounds dramatic and I'm sort of doing
Yeah.
the fact, but like, dude, there's just certain, like, look at my notes, like in like,
Oh my God.
I was
Yeah.
so moved. Like, this is stuff so powerful, it'll change your life. And here's why, because Emerson had this infinite mind. It's like the bonfire we were talking about last week. And he saved that in a way that I can then read it. And it's not about the words themselves. It's about what it stimulates, the resonance that it stimulates in my own mind. And of course, that's going to be way richer in some YouTube videos. Whatever YouTuber made that video, they're still kicking around in the shallows. They're not at the depths
Right.
Emerson was in. So this and this, they're dude, they're like infinity incarnate. Like, I know that's just how I feel, because I've read
Yeah.
them and I know them. And so people don't realize the most, what do you want to call it, enjoyable, invigorating, pleasurable thing is to have resonance with other people's infinities that's hiding within themselves. I really believe this. That's why we love these conversations so much. That's why I get so jazzed when I read this stuff. It's so far surpasses any bullshit content that's all flashy on the outside and is empty on the inside. And so what I'm excited about what you're describing is that it allows people to share their rich infinities at a volume and a pace and like a sort of, I guess you'd say, convenience that's never been possible before. We know that most people can't handle writing. Why? Because we ran a writing course for 5 years that was trying to get people to write, and even the people paying, half of them couldn't even do it. It's hard. But then you get this easier on-ramp to sharing the infinity inside within, and then you can consume others' infinities better. And also, by the way, understand your own infinity way better. Emerson's one of the few guys of the whole 19th century who was able to, he's like one of the few guys who was able to find the treasure. Maybe there was like, I don't know, 10,000 people in the whole century who like found the treasure. And here it is, I got the treasure in my hand. But what if we go from having 0.00001% of people able to even find the treasure within or recognize it in others to like 5 to 10% of people? There's just this infinite flourishing of creative.
Mhm.
I mean, look, yeah, dude, it's just stuff I've been thinking about lately. I really, really see it.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I totally I'm into that vision. Like I'm working on it, and like I think there's a, I mean, I'm doing it because I actually just like want to do it, to know it, and I realize that in the future maybe it could help in these matters, and that's exciting. And I believe in the positive. I totally believe in the upside, and I think, like you're saying, like I think there's like there's a very reactionary negative, right? Like, oh, I want to wake up and do it, and like there's value in spending 50 hours on a long form essay. That's kind of the reactionary negative, and the positives are not so obvious. I wrote an essay on this called what is it? Something about the editor gods, right? A lot of people had a gut reaction, I got feedback, and I feel like I shaped it. And like, okay, look, here's that positive vision. I still think there's layers of invisible amputations that come with, you know what I mean? Like it is simultaneously better than we can imagine. And also when we get there, there's going to be these like secret forces. Like I'm just imagining if, let's just say, for example, everybody had access to this. Every single person could, through some combination of whatever technology, brain chips and whatever, you could actually mine your interiority into a feed of content for you, where every day, instead of reading the newspaper or reading books or reading Emerson, you would never read Emerson's interiority. Like that only made sense when he was the only one who could do it. But now that everyone can do it, I'm just going to read my own genius to me every day for 5 hours. And it's just, I'm in tears at how amazing it is, you know? And then it's like you're in this intellectual creative heaven of your own, you know? And I think that's solvable, right? I think it's kind of interesting where if someone is parallel to me in their own loop, then their thoughts, if they're related to mine, get baked into the stuff that gets fed back to me. And so through my own works, I'm citing authors I don't even know. And it's like, wow, this guy came up in like 10 of my posts last week. I should reach out to him. So I think there's a world in which it could, like, you know, and a bad scenario like that can be mitigated and solved through design. But I just feel like there's like tons of ways that even the best vision can go wrong. And I think like as the inventor of something, you should never not invent it. Like Garrett and I talk about this a lot. Like Oppenheimer had to create the thing, and he should never doubt himself for making it. But you kind of have to do your best to understand the ways that it might, um, backfire.
Yeah, I think it's wise to think about that,
Yeah.
right? I can go super ecstatic on the transcendent vision. But yeah, you're right. Of course, there's, I mean, it's ironic. That's the double side of this, because last week all we talked about was the invisible amputations. Now I'm saying there's the invisible upside. They're both
Yeah. It's a paradox. It's like, and
total
it's
paradox.
complexity. And I really think that is what people need to be open to wrestling with complexity. If we want any shot, like I think when we reduce things to simple camps, that's when we get in trouble.
But I almost feel like part of the problem right now though is like to me, maybe one word it comes back to is sense making. Because what are the liberal arts? What is literature and history and philosophy other than sense making? It's a form of grappling with the world we find ourselves thrown into and making sense of it. So now what you have is like this inexorable pace of technological development. And this is what the Jordan Hall, Schmachtenberger, Vervaeke guys always say. You have these two trends that are both true. You have the exponential increase of technological capacity, whether that's just tech in general, or like they'll talk about like capacity to project violence, but whatever. There's an infinite increase on the tech side, combined with a simultaneously infinite decrease of our ability to make sense of the world. Okay. But what I'm so excited about is that
Oh, I like this. I like
right
where
now
you're
we're
going.
so like, dude, it is the most, there's got to be some term, there's like this intellectual, it's not intellectual isolation, it's intellectual saturation. Like I'm overly, I am surrounded by books in my apartment. You'll see, I got there, like here, all these books. I've read, I think half of them. But my ability to find interesting books and click twice on Amazon to purchase them exceeds my capacity to read them. I'm still reading, plenty, but I'm fairly well read, but it's such a frustrating feeling to know the gap between how well read I want to be versus how well read I am. Then that's not to mention, dude, all the amazing things I come across on Substack, who then are all referencing other ideas. All the infinite number of YouTube videos for Vervaeke's like long series on the meaning crisis. He's every episode referencing 10 authors that all sound fascinating. Like, because we live in this time of info abundance, we live in information abundance, but our ability to like harness and process that from like the humanities perspective, we're still in the info scarce. I'm taking notes and write my essay. And what's exciting to me about what you're outlining, it's like this arms race, and it's like this catching up of the ability to create and consume can kind of catch up to the rate at which we're exposed. I'm currently just exposed to like 100 times more stuff than I would have if I was like my parents' age, in the 80s. Probably 100,000 times more exposure, right? But my ability to like write an essay to grapple with the world in which I'm living isn't that different. I mean, yeah, there's Twitter and Substack and things, but the actual,
As far as it's ever been, yeah.
aren't that different. If my dad would have been 30 in 1985. If he was sitting in 1985 or 1986 and he wanted to write an essay, yes, I know he can't Google things, like there are differences, but the actual mechanics of writing the actual thing, okay, he'd be on a typewriter or like an early PC. I'm on my MacBook. Dude, they're still not that different. They're not like categorically, fundamentally so transformed. And what's cool about the vision you're outlining is it is a fundamental transformation, excuse me. It's a fundamental transformation of our ability to know ourselves, understand the ideas of others, and then have dialogue with us. Because I think understanding ideas is sort of this passive reading of either stuff from the past or contemporaries, but then the idea, so it's the infinite ability to understand ourselves, understand others, and dialogue with others. Those three things are unleashed, as you described, which understanding myself compared to my dad, arguably worse, because he wasn't sitting, spending 2 hours on YouTube and shit, right? My dad's ability to understand others, like pretty similar, honestly. Like, yeah, I have like a Readwise reader or like Substack, but like I'm still limited by like the bandwidth of the human brain to like consume ideas, and I'm still jotting down handwritten notes. My dad's ability to dialogue with others was severely limited compared to what I have, because we're having this conversation now. In my dad's era, I never would have met you. And so like that piece of it is for sure better. But those other two, understanding my own brain and understanding the ideas of others, is severely limited compared to what could be possible. Does it make sense? Like 2 out of the 3 legs of the stool haven't changed since 1985.
Right. And I think articulation is another part of it too. Once you understand yourself, your ideas, and others, you might even have all three, but if you haven't put in the million words to write, you're not going to be able to make something that can inspire a culture. And I really love that image of technology going exponential and sense making going de-exponential. And that's a problem. And like the stakes get higher and higher when we get more powerful and we can't make sense of it. So you could think the mission of AI should be to actually get our sense making to a point where we can understand the realm of the implications of where we are.
Mhm.
You know, like we can actually assess our socio-technological situation and like make decisions and point out things for what they really are. Dude, Vervaeke is so good. I listened to a lecture of his the other night with Jordan Peterson, and he had a definition of the sacred, which I thought was
Let's hear it. I'll put it in my
really
notes.
helpful. And it ties to technology too, if you think about it. He
Let's
says
hear
the
it.
sacred is three things. It's ultimacy, which is unity. It's right, a single kind of truth or way of being. So ultimacy, and then axiological, which is kind of like axiologicals, I think like axis, like direction. And it's kind of like this he said it's a covenantal relationship with the good. It's
Yeah.
something you are kind of, you are part of it, you are with it, and you behold, like you don't behold it, but you are kind of with it. It's a little abstract. But the third, and this word I didn't even know, is soteriological, which means salvation,
Wow.
right? And so it is generative, it is healing, it's transformational. And he talked about reading Plato's Cave, and he's like, every time I go to that book, there's an inexhaustible power in it where I go into it and I go back to the world and I have fresh eyes. Like it is a, and that reminded me of what you said with Emerson book. And you have these three things. And if technology can push us to be in those realms, that's like the best case. But if you think about infinite convenience, like where we are kind of now because of our technology, it's not ultimacy. It's not a single thing. We're more fractured than we're leading towards electronic tribalism, a total defracturing of what we all believe.
Gospel prep.
Same,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the second thing, axiological, there is no shared sense of good anymore. Like it is about impulse and pleasure and ease. Right? We are further and further away from being in communities and being good citizens and helping people. And soteriological, like YouTube does not give you this infinite salvation of an Emerson book. It addles your mind. And this is do you know the word addle?
No, I mean, maybe I've heard of it. I'm not, so I don't use it.
I'm on this new bend where I'm writing my own dictionary. It sounds crazy,
Oh, I
but
love it, dude. Are you kidding? It's amazing.
part of my analog thing is I got a pocket dictionary and it has like all the words, but the definitions are very terse. It's like I look up addle and it's just to confuse. Like, why would I use confuse over addle? And so I built a GPT called Word Dissector. So I put in the word addle, and then it breaks down like the meanings, the etymology, the cliche usages, the cultural implications. And addle doesn't just mean like, oh, I don't get it. It means you're so confused, you're so overwhelmed with information that your brain like dissolves the pudding and you can't even think anymore. And there's another
Dude, that's
related
so good
use.
for YouTube. That's like the feeling I came to describe when I'm infinite scrolling, dude. That's so good.
Exactly. It's the opposite of salvation, right?
The opposite of salvation is remarkable because there's a certain despair I feel. Wow, that's really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's one more dimension of the word addle. There's something called goose egg addling. And what that means is that in Canada, when you have overpopulation of geese, they actually find the eggs and they defertilize them and put them back to the point where like they can't even grow anymore. So the word addle actually has this like, oh, I've been addled. It's this kind of paranoid sense that some external force has turned your brain to just like liquid yolk and filth that is infertile, you know? So
Dude,
it's
this is so good. This is the evacuation interiority point. It's like there's
right,
this emptiness in here that I feel that I think everybody sort of feels. God, that's good.
right. And the risk is that technology will further, and those three dimensions will move us further and further away. So it's like that Vervaeke's definition is a good, when if you're testing if it's an amputation or if it's something for the better, you can just test it against those points, you know?
That is so ridiculously good. Like that, like, but okay. Do you see like what So Viveki has another definition of like flow state is like insight cascades. And I don't know what this past hour has been other than a cascade of insights. Like we're in a flow
Sure.
state. It's like, well, it's like this. Oh, it's like this. And then Viveki said this. But like this, I genuinely, thus far in my life, I've yet to find something that's more enjoyable than this type of, whether it's with a book and finding this type of resonance with another mind, or in conversation, finding resonance with another mind. As best I can tell, there is nothing better in this life. And so what I'm trying to argue, and I think you're making the point about, if you can not only not be addled, but actually have this infinite richness of interiority that you can unpack through these tools, and then share them with the world in a way that's never been shared before. Actually shape them like a way that's never been shaped before, share in a way that's never been shared before, and then engage with others' ideas in a way, like consume ideas in a way that's never been possible before. You can have this infinite upswirl, like this
Yeah.
feedback loop that goes to infinity of ability to sense make, or of ability to find the things that we ought to value and reject things we ought not to value. So it's a very powerful mechanism. If I mean, there's so many things that can like make this go awry, but I know
Yeah. It checks all three, because in terms of the salvation, right, it can be generative. In terms of ultimacy, the whole idea with my essay is that unity exists, and you can define what a 100 essay is versus a 65. And then axiological is the idea you can share these things, and it can kind of lead towards some collective good.
Yeah, yeah, I totally see it. God, yeah, I mean, it just makes you want. Vivek is a perfect example though of somebody who's spouting off such preposterous wisdom. Like the internet is such a paradox because it's so
Right.
robs me of the slow dopaminergic drip of death, robs me of so many of my precious minutes of my life, and yet I wouldn't trade it, because people like Viveki exist, and my life, my world, everything is so much richer for having been exposed to his ideas. And it's not just him; it's the portal that he is to these different thinkers. I heard him recently talk about Plato's dialogues and how he said the same thing: it's infinite fount, which he can always return. Emerson, I feel, is that for me. Here's a quote I came across recently from Venkatesh. He wrote a piece called "Rediscovering Literacy," and I think this is I think this is really interesting, because if you think, I love this term. I mean, sense making is this thing that's thrown around a lot, but I feel like there's this mission behind what you're describing, what I'm describing. It's this mission of better sense making in an age in which it's harder and harder to make sense, and we're all just sort of getting browbeaten by these massive tech companies to watch all this shit and addle our brains and turn to goo. We need these like sense making warriors to like fight back against these trends. And so here's what Venkatesh says about what literacy used to mean. He goes, literacy used to be a very subtle concept that meant linguistic sophistication. It was used to denote a skill that can be developed to arbitrary levels of refinement through practice. Literacy meant using mastery over language, both form and content, to sustain a relentless and increasingly sophisticated pursuit of greater meaning. It was about an appreciative rather than instrumental use of language. Language as a means of seeing rather than doing. Okay, and then he's saying, like the instrumental uses of reading and writing, which is often what we use it for now, was sort of a secondary thing. It was vocational. It had limited depth. The written form itself was a convenience for transmitting language across space and time. Anyway, so the first paragraph is the key though. Literacy was this thing that was used to sustain a relentless, increasingly sophisticated pursuit of greater meaning, a means of seeing rather than just doing. And so it's like, to me, that's what we're describing with sense making. Like there's so many ways. I mean, think about what we taught in Rite of Passage. It was primarily literacy, reading, writing as instrumental, as functional, as vocational. I want to get more clients to my personal finance business or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is
AI writing too. It's productive, time savings. It's, you use writing as a
but yeah, but as an instrument. But this is the actual thing. Like, what is it, Socrates? Like, know thyself, like understand the world. Like this is like the central call of Western philosophy, as best I can tell, right? Language is a means of seeing rather than doing, a relentless and increasingly sophisticated pursuit of greater meaning. I mean, hello, that's what we need more than ever, because the landscape on which we live is changing infinitely quickly, and our ability to make sense of it, dude. I mean, that's what so many writers in, like, say, the late 1800s, early 1900s were doing. They're trying to make sense of the world with all these new, they're talking about things like trains being loud and disrupting the quiet, peacefulness of nature. They were talking about what it meant to have machine guns mow down millions of people in World War I. And they were trying to grapple with this with language. But like, think about the McKay Wrigley tweet I talked about earlier. He can now use his AI he can use Gemini to be this like on-demand personal trainer. And he's like, if this existed a year ago, I would have raised $10 billion. Now it doesn't even get 100 retweets. And it's like this relentless acceleration in all these ways. And they are addling us. They are robbing us of our humanness. And if we can use language to pursue this greater understanding, this greater meaning, this greater sense making, I think there's really something there. And that's what it's all about ultimately, is to have richer meaning. What's the point of any of this if you just end up feeling like goo inside? Who can, I mean, okay, great. So, Google's quarterly earnings report is continues to rise. And meanwhile, every other human is just a hollowed out shell of what they could be. It's
I really like that Venkatesh Rao idea where it's like it's a responsibility it's a calling, right? To be like, hey, there's a lot of weirdness happening. I need to make sense of it. This is a log I wrote from 2 days ago, and it's inspired by McKenna. And it says, it's the responsibility of living writers to bring definitions, categories, associations, hierarchies, jokes, and attitudes to the unfolding waves of emerging technology. McKenna mentions the failure of the poets and how dangerous that is. And you can imply like it's outside of literal poets, but what he meant is poets are people who bring images and language to process what's going on. And he means that language makers are key for sense making during disorienting times.
God, I mean, yes, dude, like, yeah, disoriented times, like, hello, like, what do you, I mean, how disorienting were things 100 years ago or even 30 years ago compared to today? It's all it is disorienting. It's constant. I mean, I can say this because I felt it firsthand. I'm constantly disoriented. I come out of a stupor of scrolling Twitter for an hour or something, and like, where did my time go? What was I just doing? I know attention's my most precious thing, and I'm just wasting it. Like, it's so disorienting.
Yeah.
But language as the sword to combat that dragon or whatever is very it's so compelling.
Yeah. It's and two ideas come up. One of them is about disorientation, and the other is about how to escape the wormholes. But first on the disorienting thing, like I sent you this article by Kevin Kelly that came out last week called was it the Trust Flip?
Yeah, what was it called? Something like that. The
Trust Flip. And he makes the case that for all of history, when we were, pre-printing press, you kind of had like people could just lie, and there was no really formal way to spread news. And so everything was a game of telephone. So you would get things and it's like, oh, that can't be true. That's exaggerated. And it's telephone. Of course, it's going to be wrong. So you couldn't trust people. You had to actually check it out and verify it. You would assume that they're wrong when you heard something. But then the printing press allowed for mass production. And then eventually the camera, it gives you this image made by a machine. And you go, oh, of course, like that's right. I mean, you even have this expression, I have to see it with my own eyes to believe it. As if the eye can behold it, it must be real. And then you can put a caption in front of it, and that's how you get fake news, right? You can take any real or fabricated picture, add a caption, and that is a fabricated reality. And so what he's saying is, between the printing press and like 2000, we entered this weird brief period where we were able to trust pictures and words. And that whole thing was actually an anomaly. And Sora and AI generated video is actually bringing us back to our natural state of disorientation, where we can't trust what we see. You need to actually, assess it yourself before you put it in the messenger.
Which is hard to do, by the way. Like, this week I was looking at all the Sora videos and a bunch of generated AI content, and then I saw Twitter. So I follow these Twitter accounts that will like live tweet the year 1924 or 1974. It'll or 1999. It'll be like 25, 50, and 100 years in the past. And it'll like do a Twitter feed as if it's happening in real time, but it was 100 years ago or whatever. So there was one that was a picture of like, I think it would have been President Coolidge with a bunch of like Native Americans in Washington, D.C. And it's kind of a cool photo. It's a black and white, and they're all standing there. And I swear, dude, because I've been looking at generative AI stuff all day, I see this image, and it had this subtle and imperceptible, but very present, like emptiness. Like I knew it was real because I knew nobody went and generated that image, but it didn't. I can't. This is one of those it's hard to describe in words, but I just could sense it was a little more empty than if I'd seen that image a month ago, because I saw, you know, a Sora video of, I think it was like 1950s street or something, and it was totally fake. But the funny thing about fabricating stuff in the past is that the fidelity needs to be a lot lower. So I think it's actually way easier to fabricate historical stuff, not to mention stuff this day and age. Anyways, that was just a little experience I had with this where I trusted that image. I mean, I know it was real, I think, but I trusted it a little bit less. And I think that'll only, it like drains images and videos of their authority. And
Yes, exactly.
there's like the meta, I guess at the metadata level, you can verify it, but can that be fabricated too? I don't know, man. It's
Dude, that's you put words to something I couldn't explain with the Vision Pro, where you're wearing the headset for 4 or 5 hours a day, and then you don't have it on, and you find yourself weirdly questioning the authority of your own vision. And
yeah.
when that happens, it's like, oh God, like get it out of here. I don't want this thing in my life if it's gonna mess with my kind of own perception, you know?
And if you spent 2 or 3 hours in it, you know, for a month straight and then went for a walk, you'd be doing the click and, you know, trying to pull up a screen.
Right, right. People have reported that, and I've done that too. Like you look around, like they're like,
Shit, so it's
so
already
we
happened.
return.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's, well, I mean, frankly, it's just another way in which sense making is important. I don't know. All the stuff we were just talking about, the liberal arts and ideas, like I do think, to use my Tesla metaphor, it does intersect with the images in some ways. But there's something funny, man. I just have been on this kick I've thought of this over the years. I probably had this conversation with you too, but I specifically felt it while reading Emerson yesterday. It's just, it's so deceptive. It's the exact opposite of what you'd expect. Like images and videos are so rich that they actually require very little mental work on your own part to process. But then it's so limited, it creates this explosive richness in your own mind. And so there's this paradox where, again, you show this to any kid in this day and age, you'd be like, that's the boringest shit I've ever seen. I want to go play Fortnite. It's like, no, but if you actually have the eyes to see it, this is infinitely more rich and exciting than Fortnite could ever be. And
Right.
now, maybe on some level, the like image stuff gets really good, haptic sensors and all these different things, and you can like create these essays like no one's written before, and then link it up with some sort of embodied like image video thing. Who knows? You know, I'm not saying that the images won't play any part in this sense making, but that's I guess the positive side of all this image manipulation is that you can have these incredible, you know, your mind, you can think of things and then create these like Marvel movie level images or videos to go along with that, and people will watch it in VR and whatever. I'm just the tech stuff alone I'm quite excited about, but maybe that other stuff.
I realized that by the end of this year, I could be I could be a short filmmaker by the end of this year.
Oh, right now. Yeah.
Yeah, you could do it now, but I was talking to someone who's really in the space, and he's like, in 6 months to 12 months, like it's just gonna be such a leap. Like this stuff moves fast. And I told him, I'm like, okay, so I could try and get into it now and face some friction and get half results. But like if I just spent a year at my typewriter and focused on cinematic style writing, as in I see images in my head and I try and convert it into a 2-minute plot, and I actually write what the scene cuts are, right? It's not just prose, it's the images and the prose. If I did that for a year, in a year, the tools are going to be to the point where I could probably take a picture of my typewriter essay and just have that straight up turn into a film, you know?
Totally. And that becomes, that stuff is then the bottleneck, is like your ability to think of images and plot points that are really compelling. Cause that's the thing that's still scarce. Like Patrick Collison just said in an interview, like, yeah, like at the end of the day, like a lot of people can code and stuff, but what makes startup building still so difficult is it's not just raw pounding out code. A lot of people can do that. It's combining that engineering capacity with the capacity to have taste and put yourself in the mind of the user. And that's the really big limiting factor, I think, for companies, why a lot of companies fail. And so similarly, I think with trying to create films and stuff, there is still like, you can generate a bunch of shit, but if it doesn't have story and arc and certain beats that tug at the heartstrings,
Right.
it'll land flat. I mean, I think of the AI film stuff. I was trying to make a case this summer to my buddy who's a director out here in LA, that he went to USC Film School and all this stuff, and I was trying to be like, dude, think of this like if 20 years ago you want to start a software company, you had to get a data center, you had to get hardware,
Right.
cooling, you had to have physical security. Like nowadays, you just spin up AWS, it takes 2 seconds. It's like, it's the AWSification of the gaffer and the boom mic and the this and that, you know. Now, with anything, there's the invisible amputations. I'm not saying it's all, you know,
Right.
sunshines and rainbows, but there's some like, you know, theoretically he has all this film knowledge from school and he can use this stuff in a way that the average Rube who doesn't know anything about storytelling, is just putting some prompts in, won't be able to harness it. Now, is that really true? Like, we'll see. I think that's true. But I think you're saying if you can focus on great storytelling for a year, you're not going to go, you know, fly out to LA and get a crew and get a location and get a permanent. You're just not going to do that. I just know you. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you're going to do that at this point.
No, no. Like a little side project. Like, oh, now because I can make films in 3 hours, sure, I'll be a filmmaker. I've always thought it would be fun to make films or to make songs, but to really do that seriously, to dedicate your whole life to it. And I'm doing that to writing right now, but like there's some transferable skills. So it's like, oh, wait a second, I can actually explore all of these like connected mediums because AI automates a lot of it now.
Totally. Just the way that there's way more people making startups that wouldn't have pre-AWS. Like they just couldn't.
Yeah.
The capital.
Right. And I think like, and I've heard this argument a lot, that what really happens is when you let everyone just generate films and songs and writing, these people they haven't put in the slow work that Venkatesh Rao talks about to become an expert, and they don't have the taste to look at something and be like, hey, that's a cliche shot, you know? Some of the images that I've used for my like Substack covers, like I probably went through 200 iterations because what came out was not good enough. And I had to change the prompt over and over. It would take me 2 or 3 hours to match what was kind of in my head to what I saw on the screen. And someone who doesn't have like a vision or taste like that, they'll just put the first thing out there. Like, oh, wow, that looks realistic. Let me just use it, you know?
Yeah, because the initial thing is just like, you know, I'm not as familiar with, you know, graphic design and visuals, but I know for a fact like the average thing GPT-4 spits out first go of it is, it's pretty bland, it's pretty banal. And so I think the same is true on the images side, and I think the same will be true on the film side. You need these other skills. But if you have those other skills, look out, because you can now, again, this runs into the limitations conversation, the kinks, are they really limitations, like that whole thing. Probably in certain subject matters, like sci-fi would probably be like, isn't that interesting? Like certain subject matters are more conducive to AI driven filmmaking, certainly cartoons or sci-fi or something, because if you're in a sci-fi universe, we don't have these like really strong inclinations about like how things ought to be. Like we ought to have 5 fingers. We ought to not have a dog that suddenly becomes 2 dogs. But if you're in some like Rick and Morty style sci-fi world, you can kind of like budget and like cover up those kinks, and maybe that's okay. And maybe isn't that weird? That could just create this huge explosion of creativity in certain domains that are more that like, you know, generative AI is more conducive towards. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you'd imagine in the future there would be like a setting you can check where it's like, how many fingers should your characters have? And you can say 2, 3, or 4, and it bakes that logic into all of its images, and it can like right now it's just generating the image, but you can imagine software can assess that image and say, oh wait, it has 6 fingers, let me re-render that zone without having to ask you if it's right. And there's something you said before that really stuck with me. It was from that author, from the article. He's like, I have no more patience.
Yeah. That was probably the top line of the entire article for me. I'll read it again in full. I am also completely out of patience when it comes to being told what it will do in the future, because that's what sort of everybody is projecting and everybody's assuming. He's like, no, I'm done with that.
Yeah, and it's just, to me, it's like there's something amazing, and it really speaks to the compression of time, because this has been a real thing for a little over a year, and to not have it's like, what happens is we're so self-conscious as a culture of it happening that we've all just collectively exploded because we all know it's going to be something, and we're almost numb from our own self paralysis from just thinking about it. But the level of control we have to shape an image or to shape text is laughably infantile. It's a single text window, right? To shape a whole image. Like compare that to the complexity of Photoshop or video editing software or Logic Pro 8 or Ableton, whatever it is, to like actually shape real industry quality works. You have complex tools with thousands of features and widgets and interfaces, and we don't even have the interface yet to deal with generative AI, right?
Yeah.
We are pre-interface
For
in
sure.
generative AI,
Well,
you
we're in
know?
DOS, dude. We're in DOS. We don't even have Windows 95 for the images.
That's a great way to put it. We're in DOS of generative AI.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, dude, it would be like a guy in like '93 looking at DOS and being like, I'm sick of hearing about these PCs and how they're going to be in every household. Like, no, they're not. Like, they're just these lines of code you have to type in. They're confusing, yada yada. And then yeah, they have Windows 95 moment. That's
Right.
really interesting to think about, dude. Because like we're not starting over with how we like manipulate images. There's, like you said, thousands of tools with thousands of features that
Yeah.
already do that. And if I mean, I guess you just have to like sort of combine the two. But the Photoshop thing is a great point. If there's a certain way hands ought to look, even if the math, because his point is the math doesn't know anything, doesn't have the contextual grounding. And so the math of the LLM can never generate that. Okay, but can you bring in another tool set on top of that to like finish the 5% tweaks? Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
exactly, to fill in the gaps.
Definitely a metaphor of something else that's like that. We're like 95% good, and then somebody else has to come in. I can't think of it right now, but it definitely exists. That's interesting because I read that point and I was sort of like, hell yeah, like I'm sick of, I don't have patience for that either. Because it's sort of like it's a very contrarian thing to say because everyone is so fired up. The thing is, he is saying it in terms of like the VC angle. So we can sit here and say, oh, it's coming, but how long does it take to integrate photo? I mean, it could take 5 years. Like it might take a while. And so he might be right in the sense of like the business value case and still wrong in the bigger sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder how long it takes for the like think of in 1993 they made commerce legal on the internet, as in the networks prior to the web, commerce wasn't even legal, you know. um and the internet was, it was around for 15 years before then. And it's kind of like we're just at such a ridiculous speed that I think we're expecting like, well, if it can't produce any business value in 2 years, then what is it, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like if you just look at the how the rate that culture has shifted in our past, it's like I was talking to Chris Kaufman before, and there's this idea of a figura, which is like a form or a shape or a pattern that occurs multiple times. And like you can see all of reality through just recurring shapes and metaphors. And I had this insight in Greece that if you look at the four periods, it goes from the archaic, which is like Homer, free writing. Then you get into the classical period, like Plato and the Parthenon. Then you get into the Hellenistic period, Alexander. And then you get into Rome, right? And that's kind of like engineering achievements, moral decay, stuff like that. And each of those things are like 250-ish years.
Him again, archaic. What's the second one? Classical, archaic,
Archaic, classical, Hellenistic to
Hellenistic.
Rome.
Wow. Okay, great.
And like you can take that same structure and you can apply it to the continuum we're in, where you can say from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, it was the same time as the archaic. Then the classical was the Enlightenment. And then with America came the Alexander the Great period. And now we are in the Rome period. Like post World War II, we are Rome. And people are saying we're collapsing, whatever, but we're like halfway through where Rome was. But they kind of have these very similar shapes. And I bring this up just because like we're talking about like 200 years of like civilizational epochs to like actually have proper revolutions. And now it's like
11 months.
things have definitely sped up, of course, where it's like things are going at a much faster rate with technology, but it's like we're so impatient now. It's like if there's no revolution in a year, it's like, what is it? It's supposed to be fake, you know?
Yeah. It's been 11 months since GPT-4 came out. 11 months.
Yeah. And it's like and in terms of a VC thing, like I think they're comparing it to software, like to Uber. Like Uber and Airbnb, these are all different variations of an app. And the app was a proven, stable, mature thing on a hardware that just came out. If you talk about VR or AI or crypto, these are entirely new hardware dependent paradigms where all of the basic forms and standards are starting from scratch, you know? And I see crypto in that same kind of um, sphere, right? I
Yeah,
think
AI
like
as well. Talk about AI.
AI, yeah. But I first realized this in crypto where what's happening is it's very similar to when internet protocols all were invented, but we were in darkness when that happened. We couldn't all communicate. And it was only the experts who could talk privately through letters to comment and make sense of the world. And now you have crypto and AI, and you have people with no credentials memifying and making sense. Like our process of sense making is distorted, where it's not the people who are qualified to make sense of it, it's the people who want to be loud and who have other incentives. And I
Well,
wrote about this with the Vision Pro, where like February is a historical moment for VR. And the way we made sense of it was through meme lords. And you see people on YouTube with the skits. I was in it for 24 hours and I'm driving a Tesla. And these are not realistic ways to make sense of the arrival of this thing, but it's catchy. And they're growing like crazy. Like there are just incentives to distort the sense making of Vision Pro for your own gain. Same with crypto. You have financial incentives to distort what's actually happening.
yeah,
The
that's
Bored
cool.
Apes and then the yacht thing, like that's all a bullshit thing, but people are getting rich off of distorting the sense making in their favor.
Totally. Well, it's just very fast side note, just the fact that in the early internet days, the most effective way to communicate was through letters or faxes. It's actually true. Like emails didn't even exist. It's insane. My God. But well, yeah, we're back to the sense making point, and it's just the thing that's hard is that for any the visual media is so alluring that for any real adoption of like this like reinvigoration of literacy, like it's tough, dude. It's tough. Now, we used to always say in Rite of Passage that most people are watching videos, but the people with all the influence read. Okay, fine. That that is true. I would love for more smart people to be reading. And so I reread my notes on Sovereign Individual, and he talks about societies like this turn up where like the top 5% are sort of like techno adopters who have, they have capital, they have ability to like write code and things like that. And they're the ones who kind of accrue all the benefits. Like in the 20th century, a huge class of unskilled people could accrue benefits because just where the lines intersected with technological development and stuff, like you can work in a factory and get a pension and stuff. And then that's like, we're past that. So it's like a very small class of people who can accrue a lot of the benefits, and a lot of other people. Venkat talks about the API line. You're either telling the software what to do or being told by software what to do. And so if you're
Wow.
both, isn't that cool? Like in the future, you'll either tell software what to do or be told, and like the DoorDash delivery guys being told by software what to do. So you want to be above that line to accrue a lot of the value. And the people above that line, or the people at the top of the turnip, whatever, are going to be the ones who are sort of participants in this revolution in literacy. I would love for it to be a lot of people, but the sense making revolution we're talking about, like, I think probably is limited that group. But even amongst that group, a lot of people are, dude, how many smart people do we know are sucked into Twitter, sucked into YouTube? I mean, hey, Exhibit A right here. Like, it's so much of our time is sucked into these things. And like, I wonder with maybe the headsets and all that, like, is there some way to make the act of reading actually like more dynamic or something? Like, it's already pretty great, as I was just describing. Like, I'm so invigorated reading like Emerson, but is it the environment which you're reading is like this beautiful landscape, and the words are appearing like the Star Wars text? You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine
Sure.
a page, like you sweep the whole sky and then the next page comes out? There's that. Like, what else, right? Like, I don't know, just like as you're reading all these like associations, like kind of like hyperlinks on steroids, but then it might even distract from the real thing. I'm just trying to find a way to, you're right that a lot of our sense making around crypto, around VR, AR, around AI gets sucked into these, rabbit holes of people who aren't that skilled, just sharing catchy shit that distracts everybody. Okay, so what's your response? Well, it's the revolution in sense making, but then how do you make that like at some level, like biologically, it's just that YouTube thumbnail is so enticing. It's such an effort for me
Yeah,
to.
you're fighting a battle where it's rigged against you, against your biology.
I can win it sometimes. And when I do, I'm like, this Emerson shit is way richer than any YouTube video that exists. And yet I'm still enticed by those thumbnails. Like, they're just between the engineers and the designers and all the patterns. It's just like this infinite A/B test that's been running to make it the most seductive for me uniquely. And that's before you had AI content and stuff. So my point is, like, you're right. We can't sense make, and all these important things, the sense making is bastardized by all these like all shit on Twitter and YouTube basically. And how do you not only have the revolution in literacy or sense making for those who are really looking for it, but make it a bit more broadly appealing? I don't know. Can you like change the way in which books are read or something? I don't know. Look, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, like Vervaeke's stuff is like, so this ties into I'll say something else and then I'll transition back to this. But since I returned to Vision Pro, I've tried to live a very analog first lifestyle. So I keep track of like habits on index cards.
Nice.
Um, you know, so what I did is Monday night, I actually sat down and I put on the lecture and I took like, you know, a few pages of just notes on Vervaeke's lecture. And that's a very different mind. And I knew all day that I was going to watch that lecture at night. And then I did, and I watched with my full attention. And I try and say Wednesday nights is like, all right, Liz and I are going to watch a movie, right? And it's this intentionality where you have to decide, I'm going to absorb this content during this time and no other time. And I'm going to fill it with the best content I can with Vervaeke and a list of classic movies. And if you don't do that, there's an endless stream of media on YouTube and on Twitter that's always there for you. And so I found that it's been helpful to like resort to using paper because there's no distractions in paper, and then use paper to organize like, okay, when am I going to watch the best digital stuff? And it's like I'm just more intentional with how I like let it in. Of course, I still find myself on YouTube. I'm not like cured yet, but it's like um, trying to understand like what the digital medium is actually best for, and it's not a great attention siphoning and decision mechanism.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I 100% agree. When I read this Emerson, I take a walk to a coffee shop and I don't bring my phone and all. And yeah, I'm totally
Oh,
there,
cool.
totally in it. And I know if I was reading like on my Kindle on my, iPhone or something, Kindle app on the iPhone, and I was reading Emerson, it wouldn't land as strongly. Also, somehow about the paper, the yellowed paper, and I can write on it with a pen, it gives the words more weight. Like I always think it's funny that you can see endless just bullshit text on any website generated by AI or some shitty blog post somebody writes. And at face value, like Emerson's writing is the same. It's just a bunch of words. They're just in different orders. But his thing is like 1,000 times richer and denser. And somehow that gravity is conveyed more effectively when it's on paper because the light, pointless stuff, the fluff is all on screens and it's got a weightiness. So maybe that is this medium. The problem we run into there is what we talked about last week, which is the market incentivization is so, whatever we were talking about, like markets are this like beyond human force, like sucking our attention in basically screens. Like you can't really monetize from a book too effectively. So
Mhm.
I do think it's a single player game, or like in small ways like this, we can talk and encourage each other, but it's hard. Maybe this is a CBC or something one day, but it's hard to like sense making CBC, but it's kind of,
That's for Vervaeke to go viral, right? It's like you really need to sit
very
down and
hard.
make an event like, all right, I gotta zone in
I mean,
for
now the
90
key is
minutes.
it's not impossible because if you saw the TikTok generation stuff, you're like, oh, this guy's no chance. And yet it's the barbell thing, right? So 3 hour, like he did one with Ian McGilchrist and Jordan Hall on like left brain, right brain. And it was, I listened to it on the plane to China, so I didn't actually take notes on it, but it was, I need to rewatch and take notes. It was just mind bending shit. Like it was so good. And so people do have stamina to watch these long things. A percentage of people do. But yeah, to go viral is because it's so nuanced, dude. Like the shit that goes viral or memes are, Joe Biden's old, Trump's an idiot. Like it's just
Right.
simple mustard. And this is like a 3-star Michelin restaurant. That how do you? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I guess like there's this very 1960s notion where it's like, let's turn on the world's consciousness. Like, let's have this democratic kind of upscaling of our taste and how we spend our time and we treat other people, our values. Um, and I mean, yeah, there's just like a lot of biological factors, market factors kind of stacked against that.
very
And
hard.
you used this phrase before. I mean, maybe 5% of people will use this, new AI tool to excavate their interior. And if that went up, maybe 10% will watch it, and like it doesn't have to be some sort of like absolute.
Oh, it can trickle down into other forms, perhaps.
Sure.
Like if there's this revolution in sense making, then there is maybe some. By the way, like Vervaeke is a lot more likely to be. First of all, he's on like Theo Von's podcast, and that's getting some percentage of people like
That's
to
true.
go down the Vervaeke rabbit hole. But also, like, if you have some AI generated video that can like summarize his thing in an attractive way, and then people want to watch that, like there's some hope there, I guess. Yeah, I mean, ironically, it kind of goes. We probably wrap here soon. It's a long podcast, but at some point, but it does really dovetail with that third point we were planning to talk about, um, which was what, which was the Douglas Rushkoff and those
Right.
guys trying to remember exactly the point I was looking to make here. They, anyways, I might have lost the exact thread. I just had a thread. I might have lost it, but they were. I forget exactly what I was going to say. I had something. They were talking about all the negatives of tech, which are really obvious. And maybe there's, yeah, maybe I'll think of it. But
Sure. Was it something like you were talking about Vervaeke and like how it's kind of dense and
yeah, let me see if I have it here. Yeah, well, at one point they made those relevant to what we talked about last week. Is that the one guy was saying he released his activist side, just focus on the artist observer side, which is basically like trying to change, instead of trying to change the world, just focus on your world. So that's
right.
sort of relevant. No, yeah, I don't know that I have the point, but it's not that important. I mean, yeah, I'll let you know if I think of it. But
Sure.
anyways, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in there. The one that was in there that was interesting was the apple as the symbol of the forbidden fruit. That was kind of a mind blower. I'd never actually considered that. Have you heard that before?
If I did, I forgot it and it blew my
That
mind.
was whoa. It's kind of like when the name of the show Black Mirror, it's like your phone is a black mirror, blah blah blah. It's like I've like 6 of these in my house: Apple TV, iPhone, iPad, other iPhone, computer, other computer, like, and they're all just like the symbol of like biting. Well, you barely see it, but yeah, biting from like the forbidden fruit, the tree of knowledge, and that was like intentional from Steve Jobs. It's like whoa,
Yeah.
that was pretty fascinating. But dude,
That's an example of a figura, right? It's like by like that story of biting out of forbidden fruit and kind of falling into an underworld. In ancient Greece, in the Eleusinian mysteries, the whole myth is this daughter eats something that kind of damns her to the underworld, right? So it's ancient Greece. And this is Faust's play too. It's a slightly different form, but it's eternal knowledge granted by Mephistopheles, who's kind of this devil, and you get infinite power, but with a huge trade-off. Like that bargain is
yeah.
oh, it must be too good to be true, you know?
Yeah, dude. What's that figura? I've actually never. How do you spell that? I've never heard that before.
Figura.
Awesome phrase. It's just like a recurring pattern. Yeah, that's. I don't say archetype. I guess it's similar to archetype, but
Yeah, I think the phrase is like form and figura. So form is like the shape of the current thing, and figura is like the pattern that
it would be a
generates the
Christmas.
form.
That's a great phrase, man. Wow.
Yeah.
I gotta look into that. Whew. Wow, man. I feel like we really got smart today. That middle part, just talking about the literacy and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot there. So
Yeah.
let's want to leave it there, and then we can debrief for a few minutes. And
Can I say one more thing? I just have a rogue thought that I feel like before we end it
all
off.
right. Yeah, go for it.
It's like it's funny just to think of the two total extremes. Like when you're trying to project into the future, the range, and it's this kind of technology, the range is so radical. It's like there's this one world in which we become illiterate, right? Like the worst case scenario is we're in this hyper addictive field of video, and it's just the oral tradition. And like we're using GPT to think for us, so we don't even have to think. We just kind of talk to it, and no one even uses letters anymore, right? That's kind of like the absolute like weird worst case. It's a regression in the public's ability. There's another utopian case where through this supreme intelligence, we actually solve all of our problems of scarcity, and we enter a post-work society where no one has to work. And maybe our extreme addiction has to do with the fact that most of our day is filled with kind of working jobs, and it's a very transactional thing. And if we had all this free time, it would actually drive people into their interiorities, and we see kind of people rejecting YouTube. So with something that is revolutionary, there are these unpredictable things that will then have cascade. It's all these cascades that just make it like pretty much impossible to forecast.
Yeah, extremely like a heaven state and a hell state, basically. I mean, I don't think there's ever, well, if Dr. Taylor Foreman, he'd say, the exciting thing to him about Christianity is that the mission is to recreate God's kingdom on earth. So there is like this utopic vision you're driving toward that's very real. Outside of that, I don't know that there's a true heaven state with no problems on earth, but man, you could certainly go a lot of the way there. I mean, having that where people are just, to me, there's nothing better. Do you think this is what I want to do with all my time if I could just explore because it's infinitely interesting, because my own interiority is infinite. And then like the Plato's cave or any number of books and works out there are these infinite fountains of wisdom. And then you combine just those two is amazing. And then you interact with others. It's
Yeah.
well, 10 lifetimes with it, 100 lifetimes with it. But it reminds me of this framing of like your own life. Like you have the things you know you ought to do and things you know you ought not to do. And you can imagine your own life. If you have like your best day every day in succession, day after day after day, you end up in sort of like a heaven state where you've actualized your potential, you're fit, you're healthy, you have great relationships, you have meaningful work in your life, and just a rich, it's kind of like the utopic vision of your own life. And that's sort of a heaven here on earth. And then the opposite of that is when you make really bad decisions day after day, you get addicted and you have, your brain becomes addled, right? And whatever else, like you eventually, you're overweight, you're distracted, you're unfocused, you have thin relationships with your loved ones, you end up in a hell state. So that can happen. I mean, there's a figura, I'm gonna use that word all the time now, dim. That can happen within bounds of a human life. And that can also happen within the bounds of like a society. And so there's a great C.S. Lewis quote about like how it's just this thing about how your daily decisions really matter. And it's like the one time you cave into eating a chocolate bar or porn or whatever, that's like, he frames it in Christian terms, like the enemy has like won an advancement. It's like a war, and you've like given up the right flank, and that could lead to cascading effects where it derails your whole life. But vice versa, if you resist just one day, one of those temptations or whatever, that could create a cascading effect to the positive direction. So what's so exciting about living this age, like, dude, we're 30. Like this is our 30 years coming up of like prime working years and stuff. And like, what could be more exciting than to have these massive questions posed as a society, and then as an individual to have the opportunity to have conversations with you, sense making. I mean, we've done a lot of sense making just on this call, and I'll use this for years to come, and this will continue. And then we can have others, and there's no predetermined way it's going to go. It's just our collective ability to choose to not eat the candy bar, to choose the candy bar being scroll TikTok and out of your brain or whatever, right? To choose the higher self rather than the race at the bottom of the brainstem self. It's not easy, and I struggle with it every day, but having conversations like this invigorates me in the positive direction, and then you kind of movement eventually. And I love that it happens to be oriented around, for what we're talking about, our purposes, liberal arts, literature, history, philosophy. That's like, to me, that's the juice of life. That's the thing. And so what a cool sense of mission, it's nothing better than central challenge of our time. So let's get after it.
Yeah, that's a good closing comment. There's going to be no shortage of just disorientation that we need to make sense of.
The central calling of our age is to learn how to use these tools in a way that doesn't rob us of our humanity. So who else but us? Who else but us? All right, man. Let's leave it there. Till next time.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Later.